Minnesota's Board of Regents to order this July 11th, and welcome to everyone in the audience. Welcome to, I see we have a full complement of board members here. Haven't seen some of you in a while, and very good to have everyone here. Our first order of business today is the Civil Service Consultative Committee Chair report, and we'll start that with an introduction of that person. And President Kaler, would you join me at the podium?
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, members of the board, it's my pleasure to introduce to you an important new governance leader for the coming academic year. Becky Nelson, could you please join me at the podium? Ms. Nelson is the incoming chair of the Civil Service Consultative Committee, or the CSCC. That committee is the Senate committee that consults with me on matters relating to our many civil service employees. The CSCC is a campus-wide body with a great deal of responsibility. It's actually a system-wide body with a great deal of responsibility. Ms. Nelson provides online and hybrid student support at the University of Minnesota Duluth. She plays an important role in familiarizing students with information technology resources across campus. Ms. Nelson was the CSCC's chair-elect during the 2017-18 academic year, and she is also a UMD graduate of class 2003. So, Ms. Nelson, thank you for your important service to the University of Minnesota, and we look forward to working with you in the coming year. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hold on.
Take a photograph.
One time I didn't stand up and shake someone's hand, but I said,
Morning. Good afternoon.
Good earliest.
All right, the second item of business today is approval of minutes from our June committee and board meetings, and I'd welcome a motion to approve or amend.
So moved.
Second. Very good. Move to approve those as written. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye. Opposed? That carries. That takes us to item 3, which is President Kaler's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's the summer, and most of our students are working hard, engaged in internships, volunteering, and maybe even taking a little vacation in preparation for the next school year. Our faculty continue their research and freshen their class notes, while our staff, thankfully, keep the university running smoothly. Meanwhile, our priorities, our identity, and our brand never rest. Among the major priorities of yours and mine, of course, has been our initiative to prevent sexual misconduct. A key component of that ongoing initiative is the required training to be taken by our faculty and staff. And I am very happy to announce that a total of 22,229 employees out of 22,399 employees, or 99.2%, completed our first round of training by the June 30th due date. The work to ensure that everyone receives the training continues, and of the 170 employees out of 22,399 that missed the deadline, nearly 70 of them have since completed the training or been removed from the list due to a change in employment status, such as retirement or non-renewal. The expectation remains that all active employees will complete the training. I'm grateful for our faculty and staff and leadership for their commitment to this critically important effort. The training is just one piece of our initiative, but it's off to a great start. There are very few organizations I know that can deliver 99+% compliance with the training initiative. As for other news that demonstrates that this university doesn't rest, I recently returned from a week-long fact-finding mission with presidents from Cornell, Tufts, Tulane, Vermont, and other universities to Israel and Palestine, meeting with higher education and political leaders and experts. And that reflects not only our role as a leading American university, but indeed an established global university. And this trip allowed me to better understand some of the issues that affect our campus climate. As you know, we have had resolutions and disagreements on our campus around divestment from Israel and also painful examples of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. There's deep misunderstanding, skepticism, and mistrust. However, I returned from this trip with a better understanding of the issues faced globally and with new tools to address the complexities as they come to our local campuses and our communities. A respectful and welcoming campus climate remains a critical priority of mine, and I'm sure yours, and it will be front and center as our search for a new Vice President for Equity and Diversity advances towards a selection this fall. This focus on priorities keeps our university system strong. At Morris, for example, Chancellor Baer is celebrating an important planning grant from the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation to strengthen the place and understanding of the humanities. The award supports what's being called an Engaged and Engaging Humanities Initiative, which will engage students, faculty members, and the larger community in reimagining the role of the humanities as vital and broadly relevant to a modern liberal arts curriculum. Ideas generated from these activities can then be activated by faculty to create courses that model for Morris students how the humanities can and should be a central part of their studies, whatever their majors. As you know, Morris is the most diverse campus of the University of Minnesota system and enrolls more than 40% first-generation college students. Many of those students arrive on campus with a limited understanding of the definition or significance of a liberal arts education, and we know that liberal arts graduates are valued by employers. Indeed, practicality and the humanities are not mutually exclusive. This award comes at an ideal time for Morris. As we move towards completion of our system-wide strategic plan, the Morris campus is developing its own campus-specific strategic plan, which will be finalized in 2019. Meanwhile, at UMD, there's a major effort to increase the number of first-generation students of color and women in STEM courses, an important priority for all of us and for the state's workforce. The effort's being driven by UMD's summer math prep program for incoming first-year students. The STEM fields, which include science, technology, engineering, and math, have been historically a difficult profession for minorities and women to enter. Women make up just 32% of the Swenson College of Science and Engineering, and racial minorities comprise only 12%. And I know that part of this 5-day STEM boot camp included a trip on the Blue Heron, UMD's research vessel, and I believe Chair McMillan recently joined the group on such an adventure. I do not know if they let him drive the boat or not. It's an important program to improve the pipeline for next generation of Minnesota scientists and engineers. At Rochester, as we head towards the fall, we're looking forward to the formal inauguration of Chancellor Lori Carroll, and I'm sure many of you will join me there. From our priorities of global impact, campus climate, creating 21st century liberal arts curriculum, expanding opportunities for students, another key priority is, as always, our university's commitment to our agriculture community. It's a major item on my external summertime agenda, and I travel next month to Farm Fest, the annual gathering of the broad cross-section of our state's agribusiness partners. That's a must-do trip for any University of Minnesota president as I represent our 5 campuses, get to understand better the issues facing our ag friends, and demonstrate once more our deep commitment to greater Minnesota, to food and natural resource sciences, and to the research that helps our producers and keeps our food safe. Also, in this critical election year, all the key candidates for governor in the House, and I suspect many incumbent Senate leaders, will be at Farm Fest, and I'll have the opportunity to strengthen relationships with them. And with Extension Dean Bev Durgan in the lead, it's also fun to be a part of a major Farm Fest event when we honor Minnesota's top farm families, many of whom have students on one of our campuses. And then there's the new major at the University of Minnesota, Crookston. This fall, a new agricultural communication major is being launched. It's an interdisciplinary collaboration, and it's a great innovation for our students, the state, and the ag community. But when you think about Minnesota in summertime, you have to think about the Minnesota State Fair. Incredibly enough, that's just around the corner and a wonderful public relations and educational platform for our university system. We show off so much of who we are and what we do at the fair, and I'm thankful to our team in university relations for all it does to lift our maroon and gold brand throughout the fairgrounds. We have much work ahead of us at this meeting today and our retreat tomorrow, and then before you know it, it will be convocation here in the Twin Cities and the start of classes across the system as we welcome, believe it or not, the class of 2022. With that, Mr. Chair, I conclude my report.
Thank you, President Kaler. I can indeed confirm rumors that I was on the Blue Heron with a very, very exciting STEM class or math summer boot camp class that was rewarding, and no one let me anywhere near the pilot house.
It's very good.
I didn't touch a thing. I just watched. We have a lot before us today, so I'll keep my report brief. Thank you for helping us appreciate both the calendar-long or year-long nature of this university's operations. It's not a quiet, sleepy, slow place in the summer, and the statewide reach that we have. Your report covered both of those. So first of all, I'd like to acknowledge the work of President Kaler and his administration in the system-wide strategic plan that's been done. Later in the meeting, we'll hear from President Kaler and Senior Vice President Burnett on the fifth and final focus area, supporting the mission with a focus on the resources we need to do that. We're looking forward to that discussion and remaining engaged in the strategic planning process into the fall, when we anticipate we will have a final draft to consider and approve. I'd also like to report now on the work of the Presidential Performance Review Committee. Regents Powell and Omari and I have been gathering input from university stakeholders, and we're currently working to synthesize that input. We anticipate completing our report this month and presenting it at the next regular meeting of the board in September. And after our meeting today, as is our custom, the board will travel to Red Wing. Our custom isn't Red Wing, but we have a custom to travel somewhere and engage in our summer retreat, where we hope to have a very productive dialogue focused on 2018, 2019 priorities, which President Kaler raised for us with his reference to the class of 2022 arriving shortly. So it's a time to look ahead and celebrate where we are today. And with that, I conclude my report. Item 5 is a non-item. We don't have any receive and file reports this month, so we can move directly to the consent report. And that's a review and action item for consideration today before the board. Is there a motion to bring the consent report before the board for consideration?
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussion on any elements of the report. Regent Rocha.
Mr. Chair, I have, Mr. Steves, I don't know, do we have copies of this? I have a substitute for item D of the consent report, and if you can potentially pass it out. There's one change to the written draft, which is replacing courtesies with the word policy in the heading, Mr. Steves.
Is Mr. Regent Rocha, that's item 6C?
I'm sorry. What I'm looking at on. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm in the wrong place here. I was looking at.
I've got a paper copy. I don't have my my electronic one open, but I think it's C.
It is C.
Okay. So proceed and maybe explain your interest here and see if we have something to discuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, as you know, I've had a lot of conversations, a number of conversations, I should say, with our tax counsel and our general counsel, and I will obviously not speak on their behalf, but as we've gone through this analysis and this kind of a evolution of what the policy should be with respect to participation, it appears a couple of things need to be clarified. First, the policy that's put forward, I appreciate what it's seeking to do. It's seeking to kind of capture a balance between participation in university events and the prospect that there is some use of access that would not constitute an appropriate business purpose as a member of the Board of Trustees. And even starting with changing courtesies to policy, I think, is important. For roughly 100 years, members of the board have participated in many university events, whether it's a dinner celebrating success of an individual campus or college, or if it is attending cultural events. or various sporting events. What I think is really important is the application of the member of the board as an agent of the institution, not only conducting oversight, but also in reaching out to members of the community. While I understand the underlying concern about how we recognize that tension between the role of the member of the board and any potential positive benefit of having access to these events, it's a little bit like having a working lunch. Certainly you get a personal benefit by not being hungry anymore, but the fact is it's considered fundamentally something that you're doing on behalf of the entity that you're serving. And so what this regulation does, what this draft language does, is rather than the Byzantine formulaic number, which I think to some extent would penalize future regents who may not have the means to cover costs in such a way to participate in these various events, it specifically identifies what the purpose of the tickets would be. It also provides for protection from members who would receive tickets and then be out of the area for an extended period of time, in which case they are not providing that function. But the last bullet is really important, which provides that if a member of the board is not using access to university events for a proper business purpose and oversight, or as an ambassador or agent to the university, they'd be required to report that to the board, in which case that would be recorded and a 1099 MISC would be created for that individual. Happy to answer any questions anybody might have. But having scoured, there are no specific IRS regulations with respect to this. It becomes a subjective analysis of what is actually serving the institution versus what is a personal benefit. But just as our senior administration would attend various events, cultural or otherwise, we certainly wouldn't question for a moment that they're acting in their capacity for the university, and that they're acting as an agent when they invite third parties. I think it is out of respect for this board and the role that we play that we are not perceived as guests of these events, but that we are actually agents and leaders of the institution. And that's why I submit this for your consideration.
Regent Rocha, thank you. I was mistaken. My personal copy has this as 6C. I believe it is correctly 6D. And are you then moving to change what is in the consent report to what's been distributed?
With Mr. Chair, with one alteration would be the heading guidelines related to ticket courtesies would be guidelines related to ticket policy.
All right. Is there a second to Regent Rocha's motion? Second. Very good. So Regent Rocha has provided us some pre-motion context, which is helpful to understand what he's proposing. Is there members with questions, comments, thoughts about this? Regent Swigum.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I was just trying to read through Regent Rocha's amendment right now to item D. The third bullet from the bottom. Regent Rocha. Third bullet. I'm trying to read through that. If my wife and I happen to be in Arizona for more than 2 weeks during the basketball season, suppose we were there for a month, the way it's written here, Regent return tickets for the entire season, or just for the time period that you're gone? For instance, you're gone from the area, you're gone to Arizona.
Regent Rocha, response to Regent Swigum's question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That's a fair question. It's only for that period. And you technically wouldn't have to return the tickets. You would just simply report to the office that you'll be out, because they have the capacity to generate the tickets remotely.
It says for that period.
Yeah, just only for that period.
All right, before I call on Regent Beeson, who has input as well, we do also have before us the proposed changes to the ticket courtesies, ticket policies that was in the docket originally too. So that's fair game here as well, if regents want to discuss that. And I believe General Counsel is here, and perhaps Tax Counsel as well. So with that, Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate the effort to try to find balance and fairness in this. The changes in the tax code statutory and regulatory related are what's been driving this. I'm uncomfortable voting for it without knowing whether our tax attorney can back up from their professional and expert with their expertise and their experience, whether this would pass muster under an IRS audit.
Regent Beeson, would you like to hear from the university's counsel, or would you like Regent Rocha to provide
Well,
more color
I
there?
think I've heard part of what Regent Rocha's background is, and I appreciate that, but I do think, especially since we were just handed the resolution, that it would be helpful to get staff's recommendation.
Other input? Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. And I would really just offer the same thought as Regent Beeson. I appreciate the effort. I understand that this is, if you will, a dense area. It's evolved quite a bit. But it is the sort of thing, I think, where we either need our internal tax counsel or potentially a third party, someone to pass muster over this and assure us that we're, that the proposed guideline would work inside of lanes. Otherwise, I think we risk the appearance as a board of, basically writing our own policy. I know that's not the intent, but I think that would be potentially the perception. We just need to make sure that we have an appropriate external, endorsement of the approach here.
I share that concern as well. Regent Omari.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I don't disagree. In lieu of the conversation of having someone else look at this or what have you, we do have to pass something today, though, correct? Because otherwise we will either way not be in compliance. Is that?
I'm going to ask Mr. Steves to quickly update us on the importance of us amending our policies here to be in compliance.
Mr. Chair, Regent Omari, the reporting time period for 1099s under the existing guidelines that the board adopted in 2015 is from September 1st through August 31st. So as of August 31st, that's the end of this reporting cycle. And so if the board has a desire to give us different direction, it needs to do so before that time frame. Thank you.
In other words, we don't have another regular meeting of the board, and this is our last opportunity before that to adopt either what's in the consent agenda or what Regent Rocha has proposed as an alternative. Regent Rocha, I saw, or Regent Hsu first, and then Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I know there's been a lot of discussion about this, and one of my questions is what is the University of Michigan's policy? As we've looked around, I think we've determined that the University of Michigan has similar tickets. I don't know what the policy would be, but they have similar ways of handling the tickets for regents as we do in terms of the number and quantity and types of events and that type of thing. So if I could just get some clarification as to what their policy is, that would be top.
Mr. Steves, do you want to opine on Michigan's or share your perspective of theirs?
Mr. Chair and Regent Hsu, we have done surveying of other Big Ten institutions, and from what we can find is that they generally break into a couple of camps. Those institutions who provide little or no ticket benefits to their regents, and those that provide tickets. Of those who provide a substantial number of tickets, only Michigan is not issuing 1099s. So that is correct, that they are not, they don't have similar guidance that is causing their university to issue 1099s.
All right. Follow up, Regent Hsu.
So we don't have any understanding as to why they don't have any policy in place currently, and obviously they don't feel the need to put another one into place based on the tax laws that have changed in the last year.
Mr. Steves.
Mr. Chair, Regent Hsu, our understanding is that they are reviewing their guidelines right now, and I don't even know that they have written guidelines, but they're reviewing their practices right now, and in light of tax law changes, and may make modifications or may not.
So before I call for a vote, I'll give Regent Rocha an opportunity to speak again. I don't think as a board we really want to be in the process. Oh, I see Regent Cohen too. So I don't think we want to be in the process in the world of advising one another about this. I think several regents have mentioned, but with that said, Regent Rocha, and then we'll turn to Regent Cohen.
Mr. Chair, traditional, the maker of the motion would have the final comment.
Then I'll turn to Regent Cohen first. Regent Cohen?
Thanks, Chair McMillan. I just wanted to say that I appreciate your work, Regent Rocha. For me, the material that has been gone over by our lawyer and our tax lawyers and so on that is in the docket really serves the purpose well, and I'm very much in favor of that.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A bit of historical perspective. When this board gave me the opportunity to be its board chair a few years ago, one of the things we looked at were what I call critical issues that were both external and internal, and that a matter of public relations. And one of the things, and Mr. Steves, you can help my memory here, if you will, we looked at this whole issue of tickets and tickets being provided by the university, not only for athletics, but other cultural events. And we did survey other universities, certainly the Big Ten, and found that we were on the liberal side, if you will, of giving tickets. And then we took the next step with our tax attorneys and began to develop the 1099. And the decision was made at that time that we as regents need to be held to high standards and set the example. And I would offer this, and I understand it gets cumbersome and it adds to the tax liability, I can tell you from personal experience, but if we want to be held in high standard by the public, I think that we ought to pay on the 1099s taxes as been advised by tax attorneys. I would just as soon not, personally, but it is what it is. The public perception, I didn't say a fact, the public perception is that we, number one, are paid, which we're not. Number two, that we do receive a number of gratuities and things, which we don't. I'm talking public perception. And to make this change that Regent Rocha has suggested, I think only adds to that. Keep in mind, none of us have to accept tickets or request tickets. We don't have to go to any events. Those that we choose to go, we pay the 1099. You can be very selective. You don't have to order a whole season of hockey or basketball or whatever. So we are really, as regents, in charge of our, if you will, 1099 destiny in regard to the tickets. So on a matter of just a high standard of this board, individually and collectively, I would hope that we not make this change at this time. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. Regent Rocha, I promised you the last word, but before I do so, I too want to thank you for the heavy lift you provided across several years in terms of helping us navigate these waters. Thank you. It's your floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Call for a vote.
Appreciate the opportunity. We've moved away from the analysis to the emotional, and that's always a challenging place to be when we're talking about these things. I clearly don't agree with some of the commentary. The analysis is very simple. Is the provision a gift, which I think Regent Johnson perceives the receipt of tickets as? I don't. The role that the regents have played for 100 years in participating in these various events would be in their oversight capacity and as agents of the university and as ambassadors of the university to host folks. We understand it, right? I mean, how many times have you had a significant policy leader sitting next to you at an event during a critical conversation period for the university, whether it's state funding or otherwise? So this is, we've gotten askew here. What is the analysis? Because first of all, the policy that's in place, to Regent Powell's point, we are setting our policy. The Board of Regents sets all policy for the university, and we have for 100 years. And up until a couple of years ago, the board had access to events and played a role as agents and ambassadors of the university. And now we've gotten, and I have to say that the language that's in here, I've been a part of the conversation, and I appreciate having been a part of the conversation and trying to find the right answer. But right now, the policy that's in place that you're putting forward is suggesting that if you've received a ticket and you cannot attend an event, you can't sell the ticket. That's one of our rules, right? And that's an appropriate rule. But you're now taxed. But General Counsel and our tax counsel can explain how is that a financial benefit to you for an event that you cannot attend, but you're taxed on it. Now, for regions that have ample resources, it's easy to say I'm happy to take the hit because it's no big deal. But what about members of the board that don't have those resources? And keeping that in mind for the future, and what should be the parameters for being able to fully participate as an agent. So the fact is, we'll establish our policy. I don't anticipate that this is, depending on what happens today, it probably isn't the end of the conversation. But first of all, no one at this table can differentiate between a paid staff member, senior administrator who has access to tickets and distributes tickets in Regents. The same tax principles apply. So if you're going to say that this policy that I put in front of you creates a liability, and I don't believe it does, I believe it puts us in line with Michigan, Nebraska, and other schools that recognize the role of trustee as an agent on behalf of the institution. But if you believe that this provides risk, then you darn well better be asking us to reconsider our policy with respect to others who have access to tickets and distribute tickets, because it's exactly the same principle, and you're putting the university at risk by not calling for that change. I don't agree with you. I don't think that senior administrators playing that role as agents of the university constitute a risk, but if you believe a regent does, then you have to believe they do in those situations. So I have asked our tax counsel, and I've asked our general counsel. There is no IRS regulation that specifically talks about directors attending events of the institution for which they're a director. There is no case law that has made a finding that it's an issue. And the only Treasury regulation that was provided to us is talking about vacations and other things that are not related to your role as a member of the board. So what is in the consent report is an improvement over the current policy that's in place, but it's still wrong, because it still treats regents as guests of the institution as opposed to agents and leaders of the institution. And that's why I believe this proposed change is the appropriate one. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Regent Rocha. I have no doubt that this will continue to be a topic of conversation, not only here at this university, but elsewhere in light of the tax law changes. I'm going to call for a vote first on the proposed amendment to the consent report, item D, and would ask all in favor of the proposed amendment to vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No. That motion fails.
Division, please.
Pardon me?
Division, please.
A show of hands? All right, we'll ask for a show of hands then on the Rocha amendment to the consent report. First in favor. That looks like 6, and we'll now ask for those opposed, which also looks like 6, which, if I recall from a meeting last July when this happened, we have no action. Now we move to the consent report as presented in the docket materials. And I'd ask for, unless there's further discussion on item A, B, or D, Regent Omari.
Are we back to the full consent report?
We're back to the full consent report, which contains the original approach to this ticket policy issue.
Can I ask a question actually concerning the transportation item that we are making a purchase of? I'm curious to know about the ever important U-Pass that students have access to, which was one of my best friends while I was in school. I'm just curious to know, are we increasing the cost of that? How much is it for students? How has it increased over, say, the past 3 years? For anyone who can recall their time in school, if the UPass was around, that was a very important factor for students getting around campus.
I see Vice President Bertelsen coming, and this would be then a question inside item 6B, the finance and operations piece, correct? Vice President Bertelsen, you understand the question, and it looks like you have an answer.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chair and Regent, there is no increase planned for this next fiscal year. It's $114 a semester, upon which last year 12,237 students purchased that. This is a pass-through. This is not a university purchase. It's something we have increased slowly over time, but not significantly. We've been able to hold it with the help of the Met Council to a very affordable number.
Good, thank you. Follow-up, Regional Murray?
Nope.
Regent Shu, another item in the docket?
No, the same.
Okay.
Presenters, the question I have is, if this is a pass-through, then there's really no liability on the university if we don't hit the numbers that were used to calculate the total dollars. Is that correct?
Vice President Bertelsen.
Mr. Chair, Regent Chu, that's correct.
Follow-up, Mr.
Yes, Regent
Thank you,
Chu.
Mr. Bertelsen. So does that just mean these numbers are calculated based on some historical or estimated purchase, and if we don't sell enough, then we're not actually on the hook for the total amounts? Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, Regent Chu, correct.
Thank you.
Very good. Regional Murray?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair and Regent Shu, for raising that question. So if we're budgeting this amount of money and then we don't hit the number, but it's budgeted, so then what are we doing with that excess dollars?
Vice President Bertelsen.
Mr. Chair, Regent Amari, we don't collect it and then we don't pay it. So there's no money. So it's just if somebody buys one, they give us the money, we pass it on to the next person.
So we're not paying up front from
No.
O&M? Okay.
This is just authorization for us to enter into that contract.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to call for a vote on items 6A, gifts, 6B, Finance and Operations Committee Consent Report, 6C, the Mission Fulfillment Consent Report, and 6D, Guidelines to Ticket Courtesies. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Very good. That carries, and we are on to item 7, which is a collective bargaining agreement between the Minnesota State Building and Constructions Trade Council and the university, and I'd ask Vice President Brown and Senior Director Dion. Oh, there they are, right in front of me. I was looking down, and you two appeared out of nowhere. So do you have some opening commentary before we vote on this?
Chair McMillan, President Kaler, and members of the board, I am pleased to bring today for your approval the labor agreement between the University of Minnesota and the State Building and Construction Trades Council. This contract covers about 300 employees, all of whom work in university services on the Twin Cities campus. I would like to spend just a few minutes describing the unique nature of this contract. This agreement differs from others here at the university in the following ways. We call this an umbrella agreement. It covers 19 different trades unions, including electricians, carpenters, plumbers, painters, pipe fitters, etc. So rather than come to the table to negotiate 19 individual contracts, we come to the table with the business agents from each of these trades and negotiate one contract. Basically, this umbrella agreement recognizes the language that exists and that has been negotiated with the unions and the General Contractor Association in the metro area. And then we negotiate language out of the contract that is not applicable to the university, or we negotiate language into the contract that we want. We historically have negotiated a 3-year contract, which is congruent with the trades contracts throughout the Twin Cities. In addition to the structure of the contract, the employment relationship with these trades differs from other employee groups. The work these employees perform fluctuates over the course of the year. So these employees do not have seniority, we don't have a layoff system, we don't have just cause termination. So when we no longer have work, we send these people back to the union hall. Because of that, we have a lot of flexibility here to adjust our workforce based on workload. Unlike many of our other employee groups whose pay plans and increases are effective at the beginning of the fiscal year, The pay plans for the trades are effective in the spring of each year. So the negotiation here resulted in an agreement to adjust the shift differential by 50 cents per hour. We do not have a lot of shift work with this employee group, so this cost is about $8,000 out of a $22 million budget. In each of the 3 years of this contract, we agreed to a wage reopener as neither party is able to accurately predict our respective economic positions at this time. So in summary, we have a good working relationship with this union. That relationship led to a respectful negotiation, and we ask for your approval of this labor agreement.
Very good. The collective bargaining agreement is before the board for approval, and we've got our leadership team here open for questions. Should Regent Swiggum?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm just interested in that prevailing wage aspect. And I see that you put in here it's negotiated. I thought the prevailing wage was always set by the Department of Labor and Industry with a survey of so many reports from various contractors of what they actually paid. How does the negotiations for the prevailing wage enter into this? I thought that rate was set by the Department of Labor and Industry.
Director Dion.
Regent Swiggum, the prevailing wage language applies to the university when we are contracting for various construction projects, across the university. So that law does apply to us. But the negotiation that happens through PELRA, the Public Employee Labor Relations Act, requires us to negotiate with the unions that have been assigned by the state legislature through PELRA.
Okay, so to clarify.
Yeah, follow up, Regent Swiggum.
I'm sorry for not following very well. I apologize. That prevailing wage rate is set by DOLI, by the Department of Labor and Industry, through a survey, correct, of whoever reports wages. It's not a negotiated rate.
Regent Swiggum, that's correct. It is set by the.
Somehow or another, when you put in here negotiated, it kind of threw me a little bit because I didn't think the prevailing wage was. It ends up being a result of negotiations, I think, in some way or another. And sometimes, depending on whether it's negotiations or, I suppose it depends whether it's union, non-union, what locals involved. It will depend whether it's negotiated or not. But,
Regent Swiggum, that's correct.
But we do follow the DOLI prevailing wage rate.
Regent Swiggum, we do.
Very good, and coming from someone who knows Dolly well, that's, as you do. The summer heat must be affecting me. It's the second item in a row. I brought the dialogue before the motion before the board, so my parliamentary procedures are a little sloppy today. I apologize. Is there a motion from the board to adopt?
Second.
Regent Anderson and Regent Johnson move in second. So with Regent Swiggum's contextual questions there, is there other questions from the board? Or can we move to a vote on this? It appears we're ready to vote on this. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Very good. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks for your good work. All right, our next item is again for review and action. Seems to be that time of year. President Kaler, would you like to introduce your recommendation for an appointment of the Vice President of Clinical Affairs and Dean of the Medical School?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I certainly would. I am now seeking the board's approval for the appointment of Dr. Jacob Tolar as Vice President for Clinical Affairs and the Dean of the Medical School. This request for action should be situated in the context of reorganizing our academic health center leadership structure, which we have undertaken over the course of this past academic year. As you know, the University of Minnesota has one of the most comprehensive academic health centers in the nation. Because of our unique depth and breadth, the future success of the health sciences depends upon integration and alignment of our clinical work, our discoveries, and our interdisciplinary and interprofessional education. Seamless coordination among AHC units and those outside the AHC are essential for realizing the full potential of a world-class university. In reorganizing, our goals are to strengthen collaboration in the university's research and teaching missions in the health sciences and to create greater operational integration and alignment. This was an important component of the original vision of the AHC in 1970. It is not simply an administrative structure to support services, but rather the manifestation of the collaborative work that happens across all of our health science disciplines, from nursing to vet med, from pharmacy to public health, and from dentistry to medicine. Let me be clear, in this reorganization, the AHC is not, as some people perceive it, closing. Rather, we have decided that AHC leadership and its administrative structure must change to better meet the university's mission in health sciences, and that leads me back to the specifics of this resolution. When you approved Dr. Tolar as the Dean of the Medical School last December, he was also appointed as Interim Vice President for Health Sciences. This interim status provided my administration with further opportunity to assess the university's current structure of work. Since that time, I've solicited feedback from cabinet members, the deans of our health sciences colleges, center directors, faculty, and other stakeholders associated with our work. We also examined the structure and collaborative work of peer institutions. Given our work related to system-wide strategic planning, the renewed focus on enhancing our clinical partnerships, and my trust in the leadership of the medical school, I believe now is the right time to reorganize our work in the health sciences. I'm extremely pleased that the non-binding letter of intent among the University of Minnesota Physicians, and Fairview Health Services was approved at our last meeting, and that negotiations are continuing. We are moving dramatically closer to reimagining our clinical partnership under the InHealth brand. And as we enter a new phase in our relationship with Fairview, an enhanced focus on our clinical enterprise is of utmost importance to the university and to me. So a central element of the restructuring will be a new, more focused and streamlined role for the Dean of the Medical School that also encompasses collaborative leadership of our interdisciplinary and interprofessional clinical enterprise. And there is no one more qualified for this significant task than Dr. Tolar. With that in mind, I'm confident that Dr. Tolar will succeed in the combined role, both as Dean and Vice President for Clinical Affairs, or BPCA. The dual role recognizes the unique nature of the medical school, enhances coordination of clinical affairs, including clinical research and training, across all of our disciplines, and provides greater attentiveness to clinical work at the university. The VPCA will report to the President, but the medical school will be accountable to the Executive Vice President and Provost for promotion and tenure and academic program, as are other college deans. The VPCA will have membership on the InHealth Fairview Board and will serve as chair of the University of Minnesota Physicians Board. The combined role is a big job, but with his indisputable inspirational energy, Dr. Tolar is up for the task. Still, the Dean and VPA will likely deploy one Associate Vice President to help oversee clinical strategy, research, and academics. And that Associate Vice President will work closely with the Vice Provost for Academic Health Sciences, which will be a new position focused on interprofessional education and will coordinate the work of all collegiate clinical health science programs. Currently, in his role as Dean and Interim Vice President, Dr. Tolar has 16 direct reports. This new structure for the VPCA will reduce that number to 4. So let me finish by talking about the new position I mentioned, the Vice Provost for Academic Health Sciences, who will report directly to the Executive Vice Provost and Vice President and Provost. This position will oversee several units related to interprofessional health training with a primary task of enhancing our work in the area to be more responsive to student needs. The leader will work closely with the Associate Vice President in the Office of Academic Clinical Affairs, who will have responsibility for interprofessional clinical training. If I could have the organizational chart up on the screen, please. It's also in your docket material. This outlines visually what I'm talking about, and I understand simply listening to this without seeing it is a little dense. So the Vice Provost will convene the Academic Health Center Deans Council, consisting of the deans of all of our health sciences schools and colleges. Another part of this reorganization is realigning our many AHC research centers and colleges or central units as we evaluate each of their futures. And importantly, we will restructure AHC operations such as finance, human resources, and information technology, facilities, and emergency preparedness into, as appropriate, the office of our Senior VP for Finance and Operation, Office of Vice President for Research, or the Office of the Executive VP and Provost. So the purpose of our reorganization is to enhance our work in the health sciences. It's not simply to reduce cost, although I do anticipate significant opportunities for greater efficiency, and we are not adding to the headcount of senior administrators. And I've been clear with senior leadership that our shared expectation is that the headcount is ultimately reduced with this reorganization. So in closing, these changes are necessary to lift our academic health sciences to the national and international prominence we all want, to improve our clinical services, and to elevate our health sciences research enterprise. These changes are necessary to keep the University of Minnesota on our upward trajectory. With that, Mr. Chair, I seek your approval of the resolution before you.
Thank you. And before I ask for a motion to bring this before us, I would just note that I and I think the board applaud the difficult work, creative efforts here, and desire to try and find more streamlined, more effective, more efficient solutions. And having spent a lifetime in most of my career in leadership and organizations, dotted lines are a necessary evil on org charts. Ideally, they aren't there, but there's a few of them here, and it sounds to me like you've done a nice job setting this up. My question for you, again, before we get a motion, is could you add a little more context around the consultative process? I know there was quite a bit of it with the faculty, and maybe you could enlighten the board.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I did consult with a variety of faculty members, and not surprisingly, not all faculty members agree with this approach. There is a counter argument that suggests that the dean of the medical school needs to be separate from the vice president for clinical affairs, and that needs to be a person over all of the medical enterprises. I am not interested in doing that for two reasons. One is it creates another senior office in the university that I don't believe has a complete portfolio. And secondly, I believe that close collaboration between the medical school and the other clinical enterprises and in the outward-facing part of our partnership with Fairview is essential. And I believe as big a job as that is, it needs to be done by one person, and I believe we have a supremely qualified person to do that. But there is a point of view that argues we should have two senior positions, and I have chosen not to recommend that.
Very good. Thank you. I'd now entertain a motion to bring this before the board.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Very good. I see a couple of regents interested here. We'll begin with Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do support the resolution. There are a lot of dotted lines here, and that creates some confusion. But there are multiple and interrelated relationships here, so I think it reflects what actually is occurring and needs to occur. It is complex. There's something I'd like the board to look at working on during the next year's work plan, and that is over to the far right under Senior Vice President Burnett's box, and it says Chief Facilities IT Finance will be reviewed by a work group to determine integration strategy. And I'm not sure what that work group is or what the scope of work is, but there are opportunities with a new structure to realize some savings and some productivity. It concerns me that we have a chief financial officer in HC and a chief financial officer in the main part of the university. I would hope that's on the table along with other backroom functions, and at some point during the next year that we get a report from the work group and have a really robust conversation about how we can bring health sciences into the university and help them save money. Thank you.
President Kaler, some response?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Beeson, thank you for those comments. Indeed, reducing the complexity of this organization to a two-dimensional drawing does require a certain amount of artistic license. And you've identified one of them. The Chief Financial Officer is there working on the clinical affairs side of it. But there are chief financial officers in all of the colleges, and they all have responsibility reporting to Senior Vice President Burnett. So that is called out there, but it's probably needs to be a little smaller box than it is if you want to. And we have a very vigorous group looking at the integration opportunities with an eagle eye towards consolidating. And we have a proof point of this already. We have consolidated communications around the university in a variety of ways and in the AHC. And as we've done that, we have seen headcount reductions in the ability to reorder activities in what we think are more productive ways. So I'm reasonably confident, without being able to sit here today and give you a dollar amount, that we will see both headcount and dollar efficiencies there in a significant way.
Thank you, President Kaler. Any follow-up, Regent Beeson?
Not yet, Mr.
Okay. Regional Murray.
Thank you, Chair McMillan and the President. Even with an explanation and a two-dimensional drawing, I still find this confusing. So I look forward to continuing to learn more, and that's probably just my own ignorance within the area. You mentioned that looking at the structure, and as you were restructuring and thinking about the restructure, you looked at peer institutions. I'm not as concerned with peer institutions and what they're doing. Quite honestly, I don't care. I'm more interested in aspirational institutions. So did we look at aspirational institutions? And more importantly, in my opinion, is this the type of structure that they have? Because that's where we're saying we want to go.
President Kaler.
Regent Amari, Chair McMillan, yes, we looked at a variety of organizations. This is a framework that aspirational peers are moving towards. But it's important to note that, the trite saying is if you've seen one AHC organization, you've seen one AHC organization, and it's a little bit true here because it depends dramatically, for example, whether or not you own your own hospital or not, in which case that hospital operations is also rolled up under there. And in that case, many organizations do have a senior health person and a separate dean of the medical school because that senior position is much bigger than it would be here absent us owning our hospitals. But we feel, and again, we benchmark. I don't particularly care what other institutions do better. I try to learn from them and tailor what we do best. We are one of the few institutions in the country that also has a veterinary school as well as an important and significant school of public health. So we have opportunities and spaces that other places don't. And again, one element on the dotted line business that might help a little bit, you'll see the dotted lines that go into the colleges in the AHC, and those then feed into the Vice President for Clinical Affairs. So each college will have an associate dean. Each college now has an associate dean for research. Each college will likely task that person also as the assistant dean for clinical affairs unless they have a separate person who does that. That associate dean for clinical affairs will have an organizational relationship with the VP for clinical affairs here. That's what those dotted lines are meant to be. The academic elements of the AHC colleges will report to the provost just like the academic elements of all the other colleges report to the provost. So that explains that family of dotted lines in the second from the left column. And then the dotted line that links interprofessional education back to clinical is important because interprofessional education, while education and degree granting and therefore fully a provostorial responsibility, has an important clinical affairs piece because they're going to be in the clinics during this education. So that's the reason for that dotted line. Hopefully that's slightly helpful.
Thank you, President Kaler. It's a new word in my lexicon, provostorial. So.
The provost taught it to me.
Regent Cohen.
Thanks, Chair McMillan. Well, the more I study it, the less confusing it's becoming. Yes. You mentioned that Dean Tolar, now Vice President for Clinical Affairs, has 4 reports, and I think I can identify those 4 reports on this chart on the left-hand column with the solid lines to them. How were those 4 selected versus all the other stuff that's on the chart?
President Kaler.
Thank you, Regent Cohen, Chair McMillan. Primarily from importance. So the Clinical and Translational Science Institute, the CTSI, is the largest single grant, I think it's true, that the university has. The NIH monitors where it sits in an organizational chart pretty carefully, and so having a direct report to the VP, and it's an important medical school element as well. And the same for the Masonic Cancer Center. In fact, that's an NCI designated center, and it's important that it be elevated up. That's not to diminish the importance of the other organizations. You see the Community University Healthcare Center, COOC, the members of the litigation committee today heard about a legal settlement in their behavior. But they're primarily clinical elements, and they can then report into the associate VP level. Again, in the ideal world, everybody would report to one person, and that doesn't work very well. So there's a tiering that goes on here. You'll see also that the Center for Spirituality and Healing, we have tucked in the School of Nursing, the Center for Drug Design into the College of Pharmacy. Some of the more research infrastructure elements, the biosafety labs, the animal resources, That is a university-wide research resource. Feels better to be in OVPR. And so we parse these out pretty carefully and thought carefully about the organizational structure, particularly around the number of direct reports that individuals have.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, President Kaler. So that's 3 of the 6 regents interested. I've got Regent Shue, Simonson, and Johnson, and I'd ask all 3 of you to be as succinct as you can as we go forward. We've got some big topics yet to tackle. Regent Shue.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Thank you, Mr. President. It's kind of hard to understand this without seeing the current day org chart, and I think I found one online, but the one that we're looking at doesn't have names, so it's not exactly clear how they match up. But you did mention a new position. Is that the Associate Vice President?
Go ahead, President Kaler.
Regent Shue, sorry about that. The Associate Vice President under the VP for Clinical Affairs and the Vice Provost for Academic
Really
Affairs.
don't want us to understand.
No, it's just your time is up, I guess. There we go. The Vice Provost for Health Sciences and the Associate Vice President for Research. Those are new positions in the sense they're on this org chart, but there are individuals doing those tasks now within the AHC structure overall. So there's not a net increase in people with those responsibilities. We're realigning, and then within that realigned structure, the next step is to optimize.
Regent Shue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And then I am pleased to hear that you mentioned that you're looking at the head count, and I think you said the actual cost of administration. I'm not sure I heard that correctly, but yeah, maybe it's wishful thinking that I heard that. Now, the other way of doing this, I don't know, I haven't heard anything about this not being the right approach, and I don't know if Dr. Tolar is here to sell us on why he thinks this is the right approach, but I'm willing to support this, knowing that we're probably going to have to revisit the org chart again in the future at some point. So without delaying any further, I will stop my comments.
Thank you, Regent Simonson.
First a comment and then a question. In the short time I've been here and heard Dr. Toller present, and then I've met with him personally, I think he's very much qualified for what you want him to do. He's very much a professional, person of high integrity, so I support that for him. The question is, how does the Office of Technology and Commercialization relate here?
President Kaler.
Regent Simonson, Chair McMillan, the Office of Technology Commercialization reports to the Vice President for Research. So it's one of many elements in the Vice President for Research office, but it's not shown directly on this chart.
Should it be?
I don't think, Regent McMillan, Chair, sorry. It's the summertime. We'll have summertime rules, Chair McMillan, perhaps.
I've been engaging summertime rules already, so.
I don't think so, Regent Simonson, because while the medical school and the health science enterprise is an important component of creativity and invention at the campus, it's by no means the only one. And so it supports, in the third dimension of this chart, really all of the technology commercialization across the span of medical and non-medical research. So I would not include it in this one in particular.
Regent Johnson, the last question on this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, members of the board. Very simply and to the point, in support of Dr. Toller. Yesterday, I encountered a medical doctor in Wilmer, and she asked me if I knew Dr. Toller, and I said I do, and I asked her if she did. She says, yes, I've had one encounter with him over a patient. Her response was, do you know how good he is? And I said, I think so. She said, he is one of the best that I have ever encountered in the medical community, and we are very fortunate to have Dr. Toller as our Dean of the Medical School and heading our academic mission, and simply want to appreciate that in a public way because he knows how to engage, knows how to explain things. He's very respectful of the board, public, and certainly the patients and their families. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Johnson. I'm going to now bring this matter to a vote. All in favor of the motion before us to amend the AHC structure, signify so with the sign of aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Very good. That motion carries, and we now move on to our important friends and allies and core element of this university, the Alumni Association's annual report. And while they're coming up, I'll introduce each of them. Lisa Lewis, the president and CEO of the Alumni Association, along with outgoing board chair Sandra Ulsacher-Huis and incoming chair Doug Hughes. Welcome, all three of you. Lewis, it's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. I'm pleased to be here with two outstanding alumni leaders who you've just met, but I will give you a little bit more information about them. Sandy Weiss is the Senior Vice President of Government Affairs for Data Recognition Corporation. She lives in Eagan, Minnesota, and has done an outstanding job as chair of the board over this last year. And Doug Hipsch, next to her, is the owner of New Life Farms in Perham, Minnesota, and he is an Otter Tail County Commissioner. He's a CFANS grad, and a fun fact about Doug is that all three of his children graduated from the University of Minnesota. So he's keeping it in the family. So we're fortunate to have Doug as the chair of our board of directors in this coming year. And Mr. Chair, with your permission, I will turn it over to Doug.
Very good, Doug, and I'll get your name straight eventually. I don't pronounce the U. Hibsch. Very good.
Mr. Chair, not an easy name. So good afternoon, Chair McMillan and members of the Board of Regents. It's an honor to serve as chair of the UMAA Board of Directors. And over the last year, I've had an opportunity to see firsthand how the efforts of the Alumni Association and the alumni relations work in the schools, colleges, and campus. It makes a difference because engaged alumni strengthen the university in a variety of ways. We'll start at the beginning with a current snapshot of our alumni community, which is large, global, and growing. There are now 582,000 living alumni around the world from all 5 campuses. This is a powerful group that can support each other, bolster student success, and advance the University of Minnesota. We are in the early stage conversations with the campus chancellors regarding how we might better coordinate to leverage the talent of all University of Minnesota alumni across the system. Our alumni engagement members continue to be solid indicators of the effectiveness of our collective work. 76% of contactable Twin Cities campus alumni have engaged with the university in their lifetime, which is a 5% increase over last year. And 54% connected in fiscal year 18, which represents growth of 4% over fiscal year 17. The alumni have been active and engaged, and during this last year, we took some time to learn more about their perspectives and interests. Sandy will share those insights with you.
Very good.
Chairman McMillan,
Yes.
and members of the Board of Regents, this past year we crafted our 5-year strategic plan. We started by listening, and in November we fielded an all-alumni survey. 8,800 alums completed this survey and provided valuable feedback on what they expect from the Alumni Association and from the university in order to stay closely engaged with their alma mater. Insights from the survey and perspectives from university leaders helped to form the foundation of our new plan. We were happy to learn that 93% of alumni said it was good or great decision to attend the University of Minnesota. Alumni are happy with the education they received. In addition, the vast majority of alumni have a good or excellent current opinion of the university. The collective efforts to keep them informed of university news and accomplishments really makes a difference. We asked about what shapes their opinion of the university, and the primary driver is the value and respect of a U of M degree. The success and quality of the university are important to our alumni.
Our degrees are like growth stock that we never sell. The alumni count on the Regents and the university leaders to strive for excellence, and we are here to support you in that effort. In building our strategic plan, we wanted to better understand what types of services or involvement alumni want most. And the 3 top responses we received were, number 1, providing career services to alumni, number 2, mentoring students, and number 3, serving as ambassadors for the university. We are paying close attention to these 3 initiatives in our plan. Over the next 5 years, the University of Minnesota Alumni Association will work towards enriching the lives of all alumni through career services, lifelong learning, and other programs that enhance their well-being. Bolstering student success by encouraging alumni to mentor students to provide more internships and job opportunities. Advancing the University of Minnesota through legislative advocacy and sharing university news and its success more. And leading through strength, focusing on growing the Alumni Association so we can do more to support the university. And now I'd like to turn it over to Lisa with your permission. We'll share more about how alumni can advance the mission of the university.
President Lewis.
Mr. Chair, members of the Board of Regents, as we focus on our new plan, we've identified 4 key areas where alumni can best support the university. First, we will continue to help to grow the U of M brand and the value of every degree. Informed alumni are the best ambassadors for the U, and the UMAA keeps alumni connected through both print and digital means. So new this year for us is a much more robust, data-driven approach to delivering relevant news through our digital newsletter, Alumni Angle. We use data segmentation, and we're now sending targeted content that is specific to alumni needs, interests, and affiliations. So for an example, an alum living in Denver who has a CSE degree and was in the marching band is going to get a very different digital newsletter than somebody who lives here in the Twin Cities and is a CLA graduate. When we first launched this, there were up to 20,000 different versions that our alumni could have received with highly segmented content. And the net result of that is that we're sending half the number of emails and getting far greater opens and 3 times the clicks. So less noise and more impact from our digital communications. In print, the conversations go deeper. Alumni told us that they want to know about significant events, issues facing the university, and accomplishments that are taking place on campus. And this is a vital component of what creates and sustains a deep and meaningful relationship with alumni based on trust. Each quarter, about 40,000 issues of the magazine get sent to UMAA members. In addition, they are spread across campus, so hopefully you're getting your issues. And we share them with the alumni legislators as well. The digital version of each issue is going to over 225,000 alumni with good email addresses. Second, we want to foster alumni engagement that leads to more university support. We engage alumni based on where they live and work and aim to deliver quality programs that are relevant in their lives now and support their well-being. For example, we support 8 corporate networks, providing university speakers and professional development opportunities to alumni in their workplace. We are bringing the university to them rather than always asking them to come to us. In addition, we engage alumni around the world in more than 90 geographic networks. Closer to home, and with the support of President Kaler and the support of this board, we are deepening connections in Greater Minnesota through the Minnesota Sparks programs, bringing faculty speakers to every corner of the state. And I'd like to give a shout out to Regent Simonson, who helped host the Minnesota Sparks in Worthington before he was a member of the Board of Regents. And that's a great example of what good, loyal alumni do. This year, we also launched the Minnesota Alumni Market. It was an innovative, first-of-its-kind alumni maker online store to sell products created only by alumni-owned businesses. The feedback that we've gotten from these alumni entrepreneurs is that they are extremely grateful for their fellow alumni supporting their career aspirations. And we've watched their relationship with the university significantly deepen through this process. So we look forward to continued growth of the Minnesota alumni market. Now, all of these engagement efforts to broaden and deepen the alumni relationships, they result in more philanthropic support from alumni. We know from recent data analysis that highly engaged alumni are 28 times more likely to make a gift to the university than a non-engaged alum. And they give $4,500 more per year than non-engaged alumni. Simply put, more alumni engagement leads to more alumni giving. In fact, alumni are already playing an important role in the current Driven campaign. In FY17, 38,000 alumni gave more than $160 million to the university. So if we can continue to grow alumni engagement, we will see those numbers increase over the decades, not only for this Driven campaign, but we build a pipeline of dedicated and loyal alumni who will hold this university in good stead for the next campaign and the next, and for decades to come. Alumni engagement is a long-term activity. Our third goal focuses on students. As the university continues to carefully manage its enrollment and graduation rates, alumni can support student recruitment. We are working with the admissions office to tap alumni in targeted areas across the U.S. to help recruit students and encourage those who are already admitted to come and enroll. Now, once students arrive on campus, alumni can be a valuable source of mentoring and career support. In March, we launched the Maroon and Gold Network, an online career advice platform that supplements the in-person mentoring programs that are taking place in many of the schools and colleges. Our goal is to grow the network to 6,000 alumni mentors and 3,000 student users by 2023. Now, as students prepare to leave campus, if we've all been successful and now they're graduating, the UMAA is there to help them as well. Our new senior send-off event drew more than 900 attendees. In this annual event, we'll celebrate their achievements, welcome them to the ranks of alumni, and most importantly, educate them on how to stay connected after they graduate. Our fourth way that we're going to support the university is through advocacy. There are 313,000 system alumni who live in Minnesota, and they can be a powerful voice to state lawmakers. This year, the UMAA launched Minnesota 201, which is a statewide alumni network that builds a personal grass-tops connection with legislators to advocate for the U's legislative agenda. Our goal in year one was to recruit 50 members, and I'm pleased to report that we exceeded that goal. And so now we are recruiting 50 more for this next year, and we will keep growing till we get to 201. That is an alum, at least one alum volunteer in every Senate and House district in the state. We're also continuing to proactively engage our 52 alumni legislators and the alumni who serve in legislative staff roles in the Capitol. And finally, from a legislative advocacy standpoint, we're looking longer term, and we have reached out to the 303 candidates who have filed for statewide office with a letter, sending them information about the university, encouraging them to learn more about the university as a candidate for state office, and most importantly, telling them how many alumni live in their district. Now, all of this work, engaging alumni, supporting students, and advocating for the university requires resources. With the $4.9 million budget, the UMAA remains nimble and focused. We are primarily self-funded, which makes us a little bit of an outlier among our peers. With a new strategic plan, we are right-sizing our programs and services to match our staffing and budget while continuing to be entrepreneurial with outside corporate partnerships and alumni donors. As the UMAA grows its revenue, we will continue to engage more alumni and will be able to provide even more support for the University of Minnesota. I appreciate this opportunity to be with you today, and Doug, Sandy, and I share a deep commitment to the UMAA the University of Minnesota, and we look forward to working with each of you and President Kaler and the senior leaders to advance the university and engage our 582,000 alumni with each other, with students, and with the U. And Doug, Sandy, and I are happy to answer any questions or receive your feedback.
Thank you, President Lewis. And my first question is just, is it Chair Weiss or past chair? I don't know when you switch.
It was July 1st, so I'm
All
just
right,
currently
so,
past chair.
Well, then I'll get this straight. Past Chair Weiss, I'm interested in a question about bringing to life for me, and any one of the three of you may have an answer here, the empirical data. I don't know if you had empirical data, but what matters most, I think you said to alumni, is the quality and excellence of the University of Minnesota, or the value and respect for a university degree. Can you give me a little more color around that? Is that when they see our rankings going up, does that translate into quality and value for them? Bring that to life a little bit for me, one of the three of you or all of you.
Sure. Chair McMillan, I spend some time, each one of my encounters with an alum is a mini focus group for me, and I like to ask a lot of questions and listen to try to add color to the data that we have. And that's one of the questions I ask about is, how do you think the university is doing? What's important to you? Sometimes I will share some of the issues facing the Board of Regents and some of the things that they're balancing. And adding color to the data is the alumni really want this university to be perceived as high caliber and excellent. And so anything that increases the value of the degree, the rankings you noted, absolutely. Any positive achievement that the university has where they can feel good about their degree, but the recognition that that degree has in the marketplace is really important to them. As Sandy said, it's almost like a growth stock that you can't sell. And so they're counting on the regents and the university leaders, and they're willing to roll up their sleeves to make sure that this university prospers.
Thank you, Regent Johnson, and then we've got a couple more here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. In any organization and its members, what I call a tipping point. What do I mean? A tipping point can be, oh, it's just another institution, another college, another university, another whatever. Or I really care about this organization for the following reasons. So as you look and survey alumni of the University of Minnesota, what are these tipping points that engage people to care about this place? Ultimately would be donors. Is it they themselves have a diploma? They have a family member here. It's about the medical care. Is it about athletic teams? What is it? What's the tipping point? So it's not just another institution on the hill.
And if I could answer that.
Yes, ask Chair Weiss.
I think it varies with each age bracket. For example, in my age group, the group that graduated from the U in the late 70s and early 80s, there is a great desire to give back to the students who are currently going to the U. And if you talk to alums, and we've talked to many over this past years, they really want to help the students of today who are here currently. But I think it differs with each age group. So younger students, it's getting involved in mentoring. It's being a part of the U and having that connection to an older alum. So it does vary a little bit, and it's the Alumni Association's job to build those bridges to what that connection point is.
Thank you. Regent Lucas.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Every year when you come and do your presentation, I marvel at what you get done for $4.9 million. I mean, what you contribute to the university is beyond measure. So I'm just wondering how your budget compares with other Big Ten institutions, alumni associations. Are you middle of the pack? Are you lower?
Lisa, do you want to?
Yep.
President Lewis.
Mr. Chair and Regent Lucas, thank you for asking that question. We are significantly lower when we benchmark against the Big Ten, which is where we primarily benchmark. From the size of the alumni body, we're about right in the middle. 582,000 is about right in the middle. When you look at the size of the budget, a Big Ten budget for that size institution would be about somewhere between $7 and $8 million. So almost double. And the primary driver and difference in where we are to where they are is university support. When you look at that, and we have the data on that I'm happy to share with you. We've shared it with Chair McMillan and Regent Powell in our 3x3 meeting that we had recently.
Regent Lucas, follow up.
Follow up, thank you. I know when we launched the Driven campaign, and you were very much a part of coordinating with that, you were hoping to synergize and maybe share some, expenses and so forth with the University Foundation. I'm wondering how that worked out.
President Lewis.
Mr. Chair and Regent Lucas, we work very collaboratively with the foundation in many, many areas. We receive quite a bit of support, but I would call it non-cash support. So particularly in our data, we share one database, and that's new. That was a big effort to combine databases several years back, which is important to and foundational to everything else we do. So the foundation staff has been wonderful to work with, really supportive in terms of services. Great collaboration on a wide variety of fronts. In terms of actual dollars exchanged, we don't exchange dollars with them other than alumni giving $160 million. And they don't give us cash, but we do get services, and our offices coordinate pretty closely in a wide variety of ways.
Thank you. Thank you for all you do.
Regent Cohen.
Thanks, Chair McMillan. And thank you, the three presenters, for really a great report, and more than that, all the great work that you do. The same thing that Regent McMillan commented on stood out for me. The excellence of the degree is so important to our alumni, and so I urge my colleagues on the board to recognize that it's not having as inexpensive an education as possible, and that the excellence which we're promoting is so important, and that we for sure don't want to cut to being a mediocre university. So I just want to emphasize that. I think it was really an important point that you brought forth. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Cohen. I don't know that there's a response needed there. I'm guessing you agree. All right, Regional Mari.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I'll just start by saying that I've had the great fortune of doing two different keynotes for Alumni Association with other alumni professionals from across the country and the mentoring program, and to be able to do that in another volunteer role has been wonderful to engage, and folks are really, really interested in the work that's being done. So congratulations and thank you on that. Now to a question that, as I think about the alumni that we try to engage, specifically thinking about age demographics and what that looks like from all layers of the Alumni Association. So if we think about newly graduated alums to mid-career alums, and however you categorize, I'm sure there's probably 4 or so. What does that look like from a staff standpoint? Should we, do we, or should we not be mirroring in our staff? And then what does that look like from the board perspective? On our board, the Alumni Association board, is it mirroring that same, or is there an effort, or maybe it should not be mirrored?
Sure.
President Lewis, or one of your board members there? I'm not sure who you want to tackle that.
Okay. Mr. Chair and Regent Amari, thanks for asking that question, because we do look at things from graduation years, because what somebody who's been out for 5 years wants versus 50 is substantially different. When we did the alumni survey, we were able to segment it in a wide variety of ways, and this was one of them. And the way that they answered the questions varied significantly, particularly in what they wanted and what they expected from the institution and what they want from us now. And as you can imagine, the younger alumni wanted far more career services. The retirees, they're, not so much lifelong learning and other things. From our programming standpoint, for just over a year, we've had a director of student and recent alumni position. Marissa Smith, she's the one that did the graduation event, and she's done a number of other things. So I feel like we are in the baby steps of that, but we've got far bigger plans. From a board perspective, we have a student and recent alumni council, so 2 members of our board have to be in that younger demographic to ensure that perspective on our board. And then,
Past Chair Weiss.
Yep, I'd just like to add that we've found some of our recent initiatives like the alumni market and also the technology, the Maroon and Gold Network using technology for mentorships have drawn a different age demographic into the organization. So it's really exciting when we had our annual event this year to see a lot more young alums kind of clustering around the entrepreneurial alumni market and that technology-driven mentoring programs.
Thank you. I would note for my colleagues, Regional Murray was the 4th of 8 regents that want to talk about this important topic, and I don't want to cut anybody short, but we need to keep moving here. We're about 20 minutes behind. So, Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I, without taking a lot of time, the breadth of the work that you're doing and the interaction, I think, is remarkable and continues to get stronger. I do want to pump the brakes just a titch on our careening toward this concept of excellence uber alles as alumni. I want to point out that it's clearly very important, and I think I've got some standing. I came through 4 programs and spent a lot of time here, and I've been very involved with the university over time. But the university does belong to the whole state, and that it has a mission that is beyond that. I mean, certainly it's great if you came to the university at a time when it was open enrollment and you paid $1,200 a year. It'd be really cool to have the value of your degree, go through the stratosphere by suddenly becoming Harvard-like or pick another expensive private school not too far from here. And I don't know anybody, Regent Cohen, that is demanding that we become a mediocre university. And I think it's dangerous to declare that anything other than this high-cost focus is going to create something other than excellence. I want to just be really, really careful about that because, and that's actually kind of the segue into the one point I do want to make in some of the feedback, and I hope this is meaningful because I don't have a whole lot of opportunity to interact here. And I don't know if I speak for others on the board, but I'd be very interested in that information that you shared with the chair and vice chair. It'd be valuable to every regent, I think. But when we talk about this focus on the advocacy, the 201 program, there are a couple of components there that I think are significant. I do think that we have to be very careful as we do these things that legislators don't feel it to be threatening. And when you come in and say you have X number of constituents that have university degrees, they want to have a meaningful dialogue, I think, with people that understand issues and can make a cogent argument, a case for what they're supporting and why you're supporting the university, as opposed to kind of being strong-armed. This is a nonpartisan position that feedback that I've gotten that it's a little bit oppressive, I think, at times to go in there and pound that through, and it's I think a little bit atypical for an alumni association to be so focused on these, and it does have the ability to move into areas where maybe it ought not. Such as selection of trustees and so on. I do know that information was used in a campaign of that variety, and I think that that's really dangerous for the relationship between the university and the legislature. So if we are going to be in that sphere, we really need to know what we're doing, and we have to be very, very careful that the Alumni Association, which already received some support, obviously by your statement today, would like to receive more support. If it's simply seen as a lobbying arm of the institution, I think you're going to find problems legislatively, but I think you're also going to have problems with membership, because I do think that there are a lot of folks that perceive that as, if I'm supporting the association and the association is running down this road on a policy argument and I don't agree with them, why would I send my money to make a case, as opposed to if we are here supporting the university, getting support for our athletic programs, getting support for our academic programs, everybody's on board with that. But once you move across, the river into St. Paul, you start to have a whole new dynamic. And so I do want to raise that cautionary point because the Alumni Association is so incredibly important to the university and so valuable and successful in so many ways. But that is a constant conversation that I think we ought to have. And I know for me as a member of this board, It's sort of a Hippocratic do no harm provision. Let's make sure that nothing we're doing is taking us in a negative way, because we need so many things to move in a positive way to be successful as an institution. And then also to recognize that the university belongs to everybody, not just alumni. And that we need to make sure that people from all corners of the state have access to the university. It shouldn't matter what their ethnic background is, their national origin, their religion. We have to make sure that pursuit of excellence for those of us that have already made it through the gate and want to see that doesn't move us off of our mission as a land-grant university for the state of Minnesota. Thank you.
Regent Anderson.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I'll be very brief. I just, again, thank you for what you do. Thank you for coming out on the Minnesota Sparks. I think it's important in my area of the country and my area of the state, rural Minnesota. I do have a question just from my own personal knowledge. I like the alumni angle, getting it on email, and I do notice that it tends to be what I'm interested in. And my question is, as I'm wearing my finance hat here, as we look to do things with other parts of the university, are you finding age differences? Like, do the alumni from the 1950s and 60s open those up, or do they want the printed magazine? And my question is really getting at, I think we save a lot of money. We have a lot of magazines and stuff printed for the University of Minnesota. If we can do a lot of it by email and things, but I also don't want to miss a constituency that might be very valuable, that might not like that method of communication. So my question is, in what you're learning on that, can we as a university learn something from you people to help us move forward?
Communication demographics, President Lewis.
Mr. Chair, Regent Anderson, a really good point. And, the advertised death of all print is premature in my mind. I think print still plays an important role, but we've got to do it smartly and judiciously. There is a little bit of demographic difference between how people want communications, and we do ask those questions and we do look at that. But what we got back from the alumni survey is that we need to maintain our print communication right now, particularly with our members who are the ones who are paying for it, and then everybody else gets it digitally. I see a shift over time. Is there an opportunity to look at the broader print issue across campus and some of that? Matt Kramer and I have had some of those conversations about how we might leverage each other's work to save money and be smart and targeted on that.
Just real brief follow-up, Chair McMillan.
Briefly, thank you.
One of the differences between your printed material and some of the others is, from my point of view, yours is advertiser supported.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Regent Swigum, the last word here. All right. Well, then I'm going to thank President Lewis, past Chair Huish, and Chair Hibsch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Which means we'll have a change of the guard here at the presentation table, and we'll invite the team up to visit with us about intercollegiate athletics and their annual report. And who's joining us here is our athletic director, Mark Coyle, our senior vice president, Brian Burnett, our deputy athletic director, McFarland, and our associate vice president, Tonneson. Or at least three of the four. There's four. No need to run.
Silly.
And I believe our director Coyle's going to kick us off.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chair McMillan and members of the board, and thank you for giving us this opportunity to come forward and speak about the athletics department and the progress we made. And I wanted to remind you, when I was hired 2 years ago, three themes emerged as I talked with President Kaler, as I visited with then Chair Johnson and Vice Chair McMillan at that time. The three themes that came across and what I talked about, what I could bring to Minnesota, was accountability. We talked about providing consistency in leadership. And we talked about building strong campus relationships. And when you look at each one of these areas, if you look at accountability, If we recall, a year ago, we sat down with our Student Athlete Advisory Council, and they talked to us about the importance of enhancing our training on sexual misconduct. And they talked about having more one-on-one meetings with EOA and OCS. And we're thankful for Tina Mirsam in her office and Sharon Dezek in her office from the Office of Community Standards, who met individually with all of our teams and all of our coaches to provide that additional training. And all told, we went from having 4 hours of training for our student athletes to having 7.5 hours of training. We also brought in the group called the Dan Beebe Group. Dan Beebe is the former director of NCAA enforcement and also the former commissioner of the Big 12 Conference. And Dan Beebe and his group focus on human relations risk management. They interviewed over 200 staff within our department on campus to do a review of our guidelines and policies to make sure we didn't have any holes to fill in. And through that training, they trained all of our student athletes, they trained all of our coaches, and they trained all of our staff. And it provided mechanisms so all of our staff know when they need to report something if they see something that isn't right. And for example, when the Michigan State thing broke this past winter, I had a chance to sit down with all of our staff and talk about the importance if you see something, you say something, and to remind them of the Dan Beebe Group training. And I also met individually with different units that spent most of their time with our student athletes. We will have a continuing ongoing relationship with Dan Beebe and his group, and they'll continue to train our staff as we move forward. Campus-wide training. As all of you know, the president, when he launched the initiative on the prevention of sexual misconduct, he required mandatory training for all staff. And I'm happy and excited to report that athletics had 100% completion for full-time employees before the June 30th deadline. So we completed that training. Purchasing training. As we went through our first year here, we had the purchasing department on campus come and train all staff, coaches on the proper policies with respect to purchasing items, with respect to our expenses when we travel and so forth. So again, all coaches, staff went through this training to make sure we understood the policies that govern this university with respect to purchasing and travel expenses. And finally, successful audits. And when I talk about this, when I was hired 2 years ago and we were brought here, we faced 7 audits. I'm excited to announce that we've cleared all those audits. And our most recent audit was an audit of me and our executive team. As you can see, it's all green, and I understand that not audits will look like this in the future, but we're very proud because we feel like we have set a tone at the top within our athletics program that doing it the right way matters. And I can't tell you how grateful we are for the relationship with Gail Klatt, Rachel Flannery. They spent time working with our department, with our staff. Just a few weeks ago, they came in and we were very proactive. We had them sit down with our head football coach to make sure he understood how their office worked, to make sure he understands how they work with us, to make sure we do things the right way. So again, we're very grateful for Gail and Rachel for them taking time to work with our department. But again, we want to make sure that we set the tone from the top that doing it right at Minnesota matters. We talk about consistency and leadership. As you know, it was important to have administrative stability. I am the 4th athletic director since 2012 at this institution. We've had 8 senior administrators depart from 2012 to 2016. So since my arrival, we've been fortunate to keep most of our senior leaders, and we've established consistency. And again, we're trying to establish that tone at the top, that doing it right matters within our department, and that we serve as the front porch of this great institution. We've had to make very strategic coaching hires and support staff hires. As you're all aware, we've had to hire 6 head coaches in 2 years. My first year here, we brought in Brandon Eggum as our head wrestling coach, and we brought in, why am I going blank on our second coach? Katrina Thompson with our women's tennis program, who came to us from the University of Notre Dame. And this past year, we had to fire 4 head coaches. We hired 4 head coaches. We brought in Bob Motzko with men's hockey. We brought in Lindsay Whalen with women's basketball. We brought in Jamie Traxel with softball. And we also brought in PJ Fleck, we brought in the year before. And these hires, we were trying to be very strategic in how we did them. And what I mean by that is, just last week there was an article in Sports Illustrated. And unfortunately, Washington State had a football student athlete who committed suicide. The worst thing you can have on any campus, any athletics program. And the very second sentence in that article talked about how the family received an oar from the University of Minnesota football team. This past year, our football team, we worked with the Minnesota Student Association on the It Ends Here campaign that focused on our spring football game. This past year, we did a Gopher road trip, and we went down to the Ronald McDonald House in Rochester. and we were visiting with a young lady who was battling cancer. And PJ Fleck walked up to this young lady and was trying to get her excited, and this young lady cared about one thing. She wanted to see Lindsay Whalen. And PJ quickly realized that she had no interest in him. She wanted to spend time with Lindsay. Well, Lindsay couldn't be with us, so we FaceTimed Lindsay, and Lindsay spent time on the phone. If you could have seen the face of this young girl when she saw Lindsay and she talked to Lindsay for 5 minutes on the phone, those are the impacts and those are the strategic hires we're trying to have. You look at our wrestling program and Brandon Eggum, who adopted a young girl who's battling cancer, and that family was with our wrestling program all season at our matches. So we have coaches doing special things. Campus relationships. Again, we wanted to make sure that we had broad staff involvement across campus. I had an opportunity in the past 9 months to go speak to the Youth Senate Committee and join a conversation about sexual misconduct and trying to prevent that on our campus. I've had a chance, Ron and myself, we met with the Finance and Planning Committee of the U Committee to go over our finances and do a deep dive into our budget to make sure they understood how our revenue and expenses worked, and we had an opportunity to do that. I also have a chance to be a part of the Faculty Oversight Committee of Intercollegiate Athletics. We attend those meetings regularly, and we try to have that broad campus involvement. In addition to our involvement, myself, Julie Manning, who's our Executive Associate Athletics Director, and Peyton Owens, who's our Senior Associate Athletics Director, are both part of the Steering Committee for the President's Sexual Misconduct Committee on preventing that. So again, we try to be very involved and very visible throughout campus. Guiding principles. If you recall, each time I have an opportunity to talk with you, I'd like to update you on our guiding principles. And when I arrived back in 2016, we started this conversation with our senior staff. We then talked at our director level, and then we took it all the way down to our entry-level staff and brought it back up. And the four things that we talk about every day in our department with our staff and with our student athletes and coaches are these four things. We talk about action. We clearly understand that our actions define us, and we'll always be mindful of that. We talk about honesty. We want to strive to do the right thing every time. And if we don't, we want to be honest and proactive in how we deal with those moving forward. We talk about humility and how we describe humility as low ego, high output. I love to surround ourselves with people who want to serve and give. We're here to serve our 700 student athletes. We're here to serve and give our student athletes and coaches an opportunity to compete in the greatest conference in America. And finally, we talk about innovation. And when we talk about innovation, we talk about how do we maximize our personnel and our resources to make sure we provide a first-class experience for everybody who touches Gopher Athletics. This came out less than a week ago, and I think it says a lot about our department. But it says Minnesota, perhaps the most overachieving athletic department in the country. The Gophers ranked 19th nationally in 27-18 and 23rd over a 5-year span. And that's from Pat Forty, who's a national writer talking about our athletic program. And when you talk about our department, as you all know, we have 25 programs. We have approximately 700 student athletes, and we have 275 full-time employees. And I remind people every time I have a chance to talk, I hope each of you know, and I hope the public knows, what great people we have in the athletic department who care a great deal about doing it the right way. We're all very blessed to be a part of this great program, and from our student athletes to our staff, they care a great deal about, again, providing a first-class experience for everybody who touches our program. Our FY19 budget will be $121 million, which will put us 8th in the conference. Our students, here you have Sam, who is on our volleyball program, a 3-time All-American, a 2-time All-Big Ten, who's a psychology major from Minnesota. We've had 9 straight semesters of a 3.2 grade point average or higher. We just tied our highest grade point mark ever from last spring. Every one of our 25 programs had a 3.0 or higher this past semester. We had 351 academic All-Big Ten student athletes in 27-18, which is a department record. We have a 92% graduation success rate, another department record, and second in the Big Ten. We're ahead of all the public schools, and Northwestern's in front of us, but again, a 92% graduation rate. In addition, we had 108 of our student athletes who were recognized as Big Ten Distinguished Scholars, which is a department record. And to be a Big Ten Distinguished Scholar, you have to be above a 3.7. So again, a lot of our student athletes are doing it the right way academically. Our students, Here you have a picture of Obsa, who's from originally from Ethiopia and moved to the Twin Cities when he was 11, who won a national championship just a few weeks ago in the steeplechase. In addition to Obsa, we also had Caitlin Long and Sarah Bacon, who won individual national championships. We've had success on the national level. We won 6 conference championships this past season. We've had 11 in the past 2 years, and we've had 13 different programs in the past 5 years. So we talk about having a broad-based program, and that proves how we have success across the board. And when you look at our 6 conference championships this year, we had our women's track and field program win the indoor and outdoor for the first time in school history. We had our baseball program win the regular season and win the conference championship, the conference tournament championship. We had our women's hockey program win the WCHA championship. And we also had our softball program win the Big Ten softball championship, ranking only second behind Michigan in terms of the number of softball championships. A lot of you had a chance to come out to the baseball regional, the first time we hosted a baseball regional since 2001. We advanced to the super regional, the first time in school history. Our women's swimming and diving program, along with our men's swimming and diving program, both had top 15 finishes. Our men's gymnastics program finished second in the country, matching their highest finish in school history. So athletically, we're doing it the right way. As I mentioned earlier, we finished 19th in the Learfield Directors' Cup standing, which puts us in the top 7% in the country with respect to Division I athletic programs. So again, we have a broad-based program with broad-based success. And we had 57 student athletes who were All-Americans this past year. Our facilities, the impact of Athletes Village. First, I need to thank all of you, because all of you believed in creating this facility a few years ago and giving us the opportunity to create this facility, but it has had an immediate and impactful impact on our program, not only academically and athletically, but through our leadership center, through our nutrition. And I always tell people, if you're having a bad day, we'd love to have you come over and eat with our student athletes at breakfast, lunch, or dinner, or come over and watch our student athletes in the Lindahl Academic Center at night as they study. We went from 7 tutor rooms to 34 tutor rooms. It has been a transformational facility for our campus. And what often gets lost with Athletes Village is that the programs that moved out of Bierman, who moved into Athletes Village, created new space for our other programs. So all of our programs will be able to move into Bierman, will be all centrally located, and we're in the process of upgrading those facilities for other programs. So this project has literally touched almost all 25 programs, and again, will have a lasting impact. If you look at our current venues, we continue to make renovations to 3M Marina at Mariucci. We continue to fundraise the locker room project, the weight room project. Obviously, we have the outdoor track that will be completed this September, which will be a phenomenal facility that will be able to compete with anybody in the country, especially in the Big Ten, with providing a great experience for our men's and women's track and field student athletes. We're in the process of putting air conditioning in Maturi Pavilion for our volleyball program that will be completed a year from now. We're also doing an upgrade to the HVAC system in the Aquatic Center and doing some work there. So again, we have a lot of investments in our current competition facilities. In addition, we have new lighting in Williams Arena and in Maturi Pavilion that will take place. And then privately funding facility needs. As you know, a week ago, we broke ground on a new indoor golf facility for our men's and women's program. I'm happy to tell you that we have raised that money, and that will be done privately through private gifts. And we're also redoing our wrestling facility right now. And again, those were privately funded, and we're thankful for your support to get those done. Our wrestling facility has not been touched since 1972, so now we'll be able to provide a new facility for them that will help us in the recruiting process. Our FY 2019 budget, as I mentioned, our budget this year will be $121 million. And if you go across the pie, if you will, we have 44% that comes from the Big Ten and NCAA distributions. We have fundraising that represents 14%. And keep in mind, we're having record fundraising right now with our Athletes Village project, so we're very pleased with where we're at with our fundraising. Needless to say, we need to continue to raise more. And I promise you, I have breakfast, lunch, dinner fundraising calls all the time. But again, we're having record fundraising. We're blessed there. Our O&M allocation is 6%, and that's down about $54,000. We have our other. We have ticket sales, which is at 18%. And then we have sponsorship, which is our partnership with Learfield and Gopher Sports Properties, which is 9% of our operating budget. If you look at our expenses, our budget revenue, again, is the 6% that comes from campus to support our program. If you look at our budgeted expenses, 34% of our expenses come from personnel. Our scholarships that we pay back to campus makes up 10%. Our sport operation budgets are 15%. Support operations 9%. Admin 5%. Facilities is 9%. And debt service is 9%. And cost pool is 5%. And others 4%. And our cost pool is what we pay back to campus at 5%. And then we also pay back scholarships, which is 10%. So the university is our largest vendor, and what we give back to out of our budget, we spend back on campus. These are our peers in the Big Ten, and these are FY 17 and 18 numbers. Not all the FY 19 numbers are out there, but as you can see, we rank 8th in the Big Ten. At the bottom of the graph, you see the number of teams that each program supports. And as you can see, we are tied for 4th in the Big Ten with respect to the number of programs that we provide for our student athletes, but we're in the bottom half of the Big Ten with respect to budget. So that's when we talk about innovation, we need to always continue to maximize our resources and our personnel. Here's our budget for our sports, and as you can see, we broke this out for our football, men's basketball, which we call our revenue sports. And you can see the revenue for them is just under $87 million. Their expenses are just over $30 million. And they net at the end of the year about $56.7 million for our department. And then if you look at our Olympic sports, the revenue for our Olympic sports, which is primarily ticket sales and scholarship seating, makes about $3.2 million. And the expenses are about $25.9 million. So we lose about $22.6 million on our Olympic sports. So that makes up our 25 sports that we have as our department. Our program size. Please note that these numbers, this is our financial report that we have to provide to the NCAA, and this is done each January. So these are numbers from the last report that we provided, but this will go through and identify the number of students that we have participating on each team. Please keep in mind, and per the NCAA, some student athletes are counted multiple times. For example, if you have a young woman who's on cross country, is on our track team, both indoor and outdoor, she would be counted 3 times. The same with our men's sports, but we follow the NCAA guidelines on how we report these numbers. But these are the number of participants we have that make up our approximately 700 student athletes. Challenges ahead. We look at national trends in ticket sales. When I show you our revenues, if you think back a few slides ago, we talked about our fundraising, and we're having, again, record fundraising right now. And our ticket sales is a big part of our budget, but we need to pay attention to what's going on nationally. This past year, college football had a drop, I think the lowest drop in 30 years. It was down 3.2% in attendance, about 1,400 fans per game. Fortunately, at Minnesota, we were up about 1.2% of our attendance from the year before, or about 500 fans a game. So we were bucking that trend, but we need to continue to pay attention. There was an article a few weeks ago on USA Today how Clemson, which has played in 2 of the last 3 national championship games, is having a hard time getting students to come to their games, and they're not selling out their student section. So this is something that we have to continue to pay attention to. In addition, several of our peers across the country are downsizing their football stadiums to combat this, whether it be North Carolina, Kentucky, and other programs who have actually downsized their stadiums because of the decrease in ticket sales. Crowded fundraising market. I'm always the first one to tell recruits the great thing about coming to Minnesota is we have 6 professional teams. A challenge about being at Minnesota is we fundraised over $50 million to host the Super Bowl. There's fundraising going on right now to host the Final Four next year. Well, that competes against us as we're trying to fundraise. So it's a very crowded market, and we need to continue to be very creative and innovative how we keep our record fundraising going as we move forward. Legalized sports gambling. This has been on our radar screen for about a year now, and it came to fruition when the Supreme Court overturned that decision. And we've had a chance. I'm thankful for Doug Peterson. I saw him earlier today, but Doug Peterson has worked closely with me. We're working with 3 former FBI agents to make sure we talk about best practices as we continue to educate our student athletes, our coaches, and our staff on the perils of gambling. We spend a lot of time, when I talk about the 7.5 hours of training we do for our student athletes, that includes education on gambling. But now that it's going to be legalized, we want to make sure that we talk about it more with our student athletes, with our coaches, and with our staff. So you're going to see more conversations about that. And again, I can't tell you how thankful we are for Doug Peterson and his guidance as we work our way through that process. And finally, as you all are aware, there's been changes in the federal and state tax changes that have an impact on the donations on the 80-20. And we're monitoring that, what type of impact that will have on us. And finally, there's a potential state tax on our scholarship seating. We've not had that in the past, but the state of Minnesota is looking at that. And interestingly enough, the state has not taxed the professional teams on their seat license fee, but we're not exempt. And so we're hopeful that we can become exempt so we're not taxed on our scholarship seating, but that's something we have to pay attention to because that could have significant impact on our budget as we move forward.
So, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, we're going to take a bit of a dive on just the funding of Gopher Athletics per some direction that we had for the board. And over the past several years, this report has included a focus on a particular topic of interest. We've had presentations on Title IX, NCAA litigation, facilities master planning, conference realignment, and today we want to focus on the history and the current support of intercollegiate athletics and Title IX opportunities across the university system. And first, I'd like to take you back almost 40 years to 1979 and see that during the 79 legislative session, the Minnesota legislature allocated $1.2 million specifically for intercollegiate athletics at the university. And this chart shows the historic appropriations over that time. And it had increased and it changed in nature and focus, and you can see that detail here. During the 1997 legislative session, that state special for athletics was folded into our general fund appropriation, our general O&M. The final amount was about $3.1 million, which translates approximately to $4.9 million today. The purpose of this history is to remind the board that the state did have substantial investment in the base of the institution's budget. Now let's take a look at the O&M allocation that the university has provided to Gopher Athletics over the past 15 years. We'd step you back to fiscal year 04 when Gopher Athletics first became a separate resource responsibility center. And the allocation that year was about $7.7 million, as you see here on the left. The next four columns show you the changes over the past 15 years. We've sent this to you. We won't spend a lot of time on them, but the big piece to understand of this is Gopher Athletics was treated much the same as all the other resource responsibility centers within the institution. And the net change over the 15 years is a reduction of about $836,000. But the buying power of that $5 million in FY04 dollars is about a $2.7 million reduction to Gopher Athletics. How Gopher Athletics uses their O&M allocation is, as Athletic Director Quill noted, they pay into the cost pools about $5.7 million. They also pay into the Lindahl Academic Center, almost $1 million. And they pay for their own information technology costs on the campus. So when we total all up and we were asked to provide all in a very transparent way, what is the support of Gopher Athletics from the university? This is how we account for it. The O&M allocation of $6.8 million, which was a piece of the pie chart that Athletic Director Coyle showed. But we also support development officers just like we do for colleges across the campus. On the expense side, we also help buy down about $1 million of NR&R tuition. As this board has changed that NR&R tuition rate, this million gets less valuable because the price has been up 12.5% last year, 15% this coming year. Also, the Lindahl Academic Center gets us some support. Our athletic compliance office, which actually sits in the Office of General Counsel, gets support. And we do help the Gopher Athletics with some of its debt service. All in, about $10.5 million going to athletics. But on the other hand, as Athletic Director Coyle noted, scholarships of $12.5 million come back to the institution. Cost pool charges of $5.7 million, and here's the detail on that. And all these pieces are paid back to the institution. So what I would submit to you, one way of looking at this is we're putting in about $10.5 million. We're getting back about $21.5 million. You could make an argument, not everyone would agree, that we're actually money ahead, irrespective of all the other things that athletics does for this campus. Since we do continue to talk about the system and the system-wide strategic plan, we thought it was helpful to put just the context of all the athletic programs that we sponsor. 4 of our 5 university campuses have athletic programs, and Crookston, Duluth, and Morris. And this is what, when working with Julie and our staff, we pulled the direct O&M allocations from those campuses and the indirect support identified for intercollegiate athletics. As you know, Crookston is a Division II campus. Duluth has Division I in hockey and Division II in all their other sports. Morris is a Division III campus and doesn't provide scholarships, which is why its allocations are smaller. But you can see that as a percentage of revenues, quite frankly, the Twin Cities campus has the least amount of subsidy from the institution at large. And on a per student basis, it's about $200 per student on this campus and varies widely because of the different scale of our other campuses. So we thought we'd put it in a little bit of perspective today. Another couple of data points before we wrap this up, just that there's been discussion in USA Today and others about where we rank and how you look at allocation. This was a recent article in the USA Today, and we ranked 172nd among 217, being the lowest at Michigan, about subsidy of our athletic program. And as a percentage of revenue, we were actually 196, or in the bottom 10%. Now, at the bottom, note that 4 Big Ten schools reported a zero allocation: Ohio State, Penn State, Nebraska, and Purdue. And the private schools don't have to report these data, so those are excluded from the work. But I think what it shows is we have one of the lower subsidies among peers that look like us, and when you look at the performance of our student athletes, I think you can see that we're getting quite a bit of bang for the investment that we make. A national context also, I would just like to point out, in FY16, so we were looking at different years, we were 19th in overall revenues, 6th in the Big Ten, now 8th, as Athletic Director Coyle noted. We were 196th in the subsidy, but about 3rd in the Big Ten. But I want to caution the board that comparisons in D1 athletics are very, very tricky. Purdue reports a 0% subsidy. But in my direct conversation with my counterpart at Purdue within the last 90 days, they don't pay into cost pools. They don't pay the utility charges for their athletic facilities. There's many things that the Purdue campus does for its athletic program that are just simply not reported as subsidy. Likewise, Alabama reports a 1.5% subsidy. They sponsor fewer sports than we do and had football revenue of over $100 million. So when you look at these things, even schools that are generating big income have subsidies of some sort. I can personally tell you that Missouri, when reporting a 1% subsidy, that's understated because they don't pay the cost pool charges of IT or athletic facilities. And these are just a few examples that we can share with you about looking at this national data about where we sit in terms of subsidizing our Division I athletic programs. It's very difficult to get to apples. I think the question becomes, do we feel like we're getting the return on the investment that we're making, and how do we feel about that? So as we move to this last slide, I guess what I would say as when you think about the major capital investments that have been made in Gopher Athletics, including TCF Bank Stadium, Athletes Village, the new track, approaching $500 million, a decision was made long ago that we wanted to be competitive in the Big Ten, that we wanted to be competitive nationally. And I think when you look at the operating budget, it's not just about the capital assets you have. You have to have an operating budget that's also competitive with who our student athletes compete against. So as your CFO, I feel confident and comfortable with the amount of subsidy that we are providing to our Gopher Athletics. I think it's a good investment and doesn't even begin to count the value of the earned revenue that we get, the earned media value that we get from having Gopher Athletics on TV across the Midwest and many times across the country. And this slide talks about all those beneficial influences I think that the board's keenly aware of intercollegiate athletics, not just on the Twin Cities campus, but in Duluth and across our system. And I would like to, at this point, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, turn it over to President Kaler to wrap up our presentation.
Please. Thank you, President Kaler.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. I thank my colleagues for a comprehensive and thorough summary of where we are in terms of our budget. I would just close with a reminder of the importance of athletics to our overall brand. It does function as the front porch, sometimes the front window. It's a valuable part of what we do. We've made a decision to be in the Big Ten. We've made a decision to be competitive in the Big Ten. We've made investments congruent with those aspirations, including an operating budget that I think is robust. There is an O&M subsidy. You've seen the historical thread of that subsidy and the balance that it brings in terms of funds flow back to the university. But finally, this is really about who we are in the eyes of lots of our constituents. And I'm very grateful for Athletic Director Coyle's leadership, for his commitment to doing things the right way, and we're eager to stand for your questions.
Very good. Thank you. This is not an action item, but it's a much anticipated report, and I know we've taken a little deeper dive, I think, than I recall in my prior years into the fiscal side of the athletic house. But Director Coyle, a tremendous set of achievements that you walked through in short order earlier, very inspiring. So I think before us is a lot of information and a wide range of discussion we can have with the senior team before us. And I'd open it up to the board for starting with Regent Lucas. I'll look around for other hands after that.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. Some people who know me think that I wave the Title IX flag all the time, but I am a strong supporter of Title IX, and I look at the income from women's sports, and I fantasize for the day that someday we will have a positive cash flow from some of our women's sports. Do any of the other Big Ten schools show any kind of cash flow from women's sports?
Chair
Dr.
McMillan,
Coyle.
Chair McMillan and Regent Lucas, thank you for the question. I turn to my trusted CFO, and we believe Nebraska shows a positive in volleyball.
Volleyball.
In women's volleyball, yes. They sell at their facility, and obviously they're a top 5 program.
I know that a few years ago we came very close in women's basketball, and I think University of Connecticut and Tennessee show positive. And so I hope for the day when we can show that positive number for women's sports.
Regent Beeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. The reality is that every higher education institution in this country that is involved with athletics at the D2 level, the D3 level, community college level, are subsidizing this activity. And I think it's a helpful metric to have that subsidy measured per student along that institution. And a lot of D1 schools are subsidizing at rates higher as well. So I think, but they see value in that. There's value, there's intrinsic value. One could argue that athletics does add profit back to the university. You spelled out what those factors are: the cost pool contribution, the tuition and scholarship money that goes back to the university. And then finally, there's the value, and it's incalculable, both as to our brand, but also what I call the halo effect. When a donor bonds with the university through athletics and contributes money to the institution university-wide, it's a great contribution. We don't count any of that. Athletics doesn't get any credit for any of that, but it is there. So I think in general we are, we're sort of a break-even operation, which is where we probably should be. Regional Murray, I hope he talks about it. He and I were talking a second ago. The big risk in this is the dependency on TV and media income, because ticket revenue is not going to come back in our future. I don't see that. And President Kaler, you may have some thoughts about how, the risk about this moving from cable packages to sort of individual pay to order things. But Regional Murray, Ned made a really, I think, strong comment. That feels like the biggest risk here as we go forward.
President Kaler, I see you moving toward the microphone. Maybe you want to.
Sure, Chair McMillan, Regent Beeson, you're exactly right. And both as chair of the Big Ten Council of Presidents and Chancellors and chair of the Division I board, I will tell you that every time leaders of institutions with large athletic programs get together, that's about the first, second, and third thing we talk about, because the shifting, over the top, cord cutting, whatever colloquialism you want to use, is real. Live attendance at the games are generally dropping. You cannot be in a situation where we're playing athletic contests in TV studios, which would be effectively what we would be doing. And technology is moving very quickly. I do believe people will continue to want to see games, and I think what you'll see is a pretty dramatic shift in how that's paid for, whether it's a license at the point of recording of the game. Whether it's in fact not free on streaming media, we'll see. But it will evolve very rapidly, and a lot of people have $100 million bets on lots of venues about how this is going to evolve.
Regional Maury.
Oh, thank you, Chair McMillan. I didn't realize that'd be so soon. First, and perhaps most importantly, I just want to talk about the audit, or the audits, I should say, that are in the green now. As a 5-year member of that committee, I'm very excited to see that those audits are in the green, because many of them were far from green previously. So I give all credit to the folks who have been working on that, who are either at the table or otherwise. So thank you for that. So I have some things that I don't think will be, accessible today. So I'm just going to kind of rattle off some of the comments and thoughts that I have. First one is, recognizing that personnel accounts for 34% of overall budget. I'd be curious to see how that breaks down by sport. So is the percent of basketball staff, coaching personnel, so on and so forth, in line with that, and how that breaks down would be a point of curiosity for me. I'd also be interested in seeing what the total cost of the NRNR increase is, and I imagine that my guess that it's significantly different based on the sport. I imagine it's a safe assumption that hockey is not going to be nearly as high as football would be, not only just by the number of students, but then also by the number of in-state versus out-of-state. Wonder if the subsidies that we get, are they broken down evenly, or do some sports take a higher percentage of the subsidy from O&M versus other sports, and how that might break down. And then lastly, and I think I sent this study to President Kaler a while back, but Sean Harper, a very famous and renowned scholar, produced a study on athletes, particularly black males, and found at the University of Minnesota that black male athletes in football and basketball graduated about 20% lower than the average athlete. And so one, would be curious to know if that's true, and then two, why, and how we're addressing that. So a lot of comments. I imagine many of those would require some more work, but I'd be interested in some follow-up. Thank you.
Regional Maury, you covered a lot of ground there. Anything you'd like the team to focus on right now out of that realm?
I mean, thank you, Chair McMillan. If there are any answers to them now, I'd welcome them, but I would imagine that many of them might require some more work offline.
I heard basketball, NRNR subsidies, and overall and graduation rates. So Director Coyle or Senior Vice President Burnett, any quick answers? Otherwise, we'll grab those offline.
Just the quick one, the third one about the subsidy, Regional Maury, they put all their money in one bucket, and then they just allocate out by sport. So there's not O&M going to this sport or that. It's just a piece that comes into their overall revenue base, and then they allocate out based on what they need by sport to be competitive in their group. So there's that all goes into one bucket and then in. So there's not an O&M.
7 out of 12 in pay in which is 9 out of 12 in pay in the Big Ten. In the Big Ten, and then Bob Mosko is not even the highest paid coach. I think he's second in the Big Ten in pay. So we try to be very mindful of that in market data, but we can get that additional information for you.
Follow-up, Regional Maury.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually wanted to go back to one comment I think Senior Vice President Burnett made about the investment that we make and whether or not we get the return. And I think depending on how we look at the numbers, as you laid out and Regent Beeson mentioned, perhaps we do get some money back. I think we get value from that's not accounted for from fan base and so on and so forth. And then there's another value that we need to look at, and that's winning. And so there's another ROI in there, and a serious question that we need to ask is, are we getting the return on investment from some sports that are taking a significant amount of O&M? And I think there's a valid argument that some could say no.
I'm going to move on to Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just look at the question that Regional Maury just asked, it seems to me that you can kind of just take the revenue of that sport, versus the cost of that sport, and then if there's a negative, you just divide it by the number of students, and that'll ultimately tell you what the O&M had to cover, it would seem. So anyway, for what that's worth, there's no question that that our sports programs are an essential and fundamental part of who we are as an institution. And I appreciate this report. There's a lot of great stuff. There's a great story to be told. I like the fact that we are moving forward in a lot of just sort of the fundamental benchmarks. Regional Mari already talked about the improvements under Director Coyle in having that level of accountability and understanding, and that's great. And I don't necessarily find the historic discussion about the state funding. I mean, it's ancient by now, and I think at this point we sort of I don't want to give the appearance that the Title IX sports, in particular, we're talking women's athletics. I don't want to make it seem like it's the weaker leg of the operation. Our women's athletics are every bit as strong as our men's athletics, and some are revenue sports and some are not. And it just so happens that at this point, women's athletics are getting close to breaking even in some sports, but have not yet reached that point. And so I don't find that super helpful. And then also when we talk about the other campuses, the dynamics are so unbelievably different. You know, for Crookston, for instance, if you eliminated the subsidy of athletics, you would lose a significant percentage of the students that are on that campus, and that's a significant draw, and it plays a very different role. And just the leasehold value of the acreage underneath TCF Stadium is worth far more on an annual basis than we provide to our system campuses, I believe. So it really comes down to looking at what our athletics are providing as it is. I'm happy to see that we're continuing to be successful at Learfield. It does demonstrate a level of quality across the board. But of course the harsh reality is I've yet to hear a story about students destroying the campus at Stanford when they win yet again another Learfield championship. It doesn't sell tickets, but it is something that we as a board can recognize demonstrates a level of success and something to be celebrated in its own right. As we go forward, I've got a number of questions. I've submitted a couple questions and have gotten some data back, and I'm waiting on some additional data on just how we analyze things. This is a pretty substantial budget. $120 million would have encompassed the entire university budget not that many decades ago, and so it is real money, even though as a percentage of a nearly $4 billion budget, it may not be the percentage that it would have been in a different time at $120 million. But when I look at the fact that our capacity to generate revenue is about $34 million more than the cost of the sports themselves, and I still don't really fully understand how some of the other costs are apportioned, it reflects the fact that there is an asset there. And I look at our athletics and the use of the intellectual property and the facilities and the name and participation in the Big Ten. I see those as assets, and I see us entrusting the athletic director with managing those assets and maximizing those assets for the institution, and as opposed to necessarily us buying a product from the athletic department. That's not the way I conceive of the transaction. I see the athletics as being a fundamental part of the university as opposed to sort of a separate context. And as we go forward, the challenge as we look at everything that we do within athletics, every dollar that's spent in athletics, I look at it as a measurement of what we get for a return from that spending versus our core mission as an institution. And so that's why when we talk about the subsidy, Vice President Burnett, it is really important, because I look at that and say, well, this board knocked each other around for a good conversation on tuition increases, and it was less than the total amount that we're talking about here. So it's real money, and it is really significant. You start to ask yourself, well, where's the first rate to spend money on, or the first priority to spend money on as we go forward. But there's also a lot more than that. There's enormous value that comes from our athletics, and I am as strong a supporter of having a quality athletic program. There's also risk that comes with having programs, but there's also, for us as an urban campus, we've got a couple things. We've got an advantage of being an urban campus because we're near a large population, so we should be able to draw people in, but the downside is space is so unbelievably valuable to us. We can't provide our football fans with a great tailgating opportunity because we just don't have that kind of space. I think we can probably maximize a little bit more than we have, but that's one thing. But on the other hand, we have gorgeous athletics facilities, but we can't find a spot for another dormitory, and we know that we have some housing needs for our general student population. And that's by no means a statement of making a change, but I'm just wanting to put out there how what we provide, what we use as resources to support an intercollegiate athletic program, it's really, really valuable, and it is absolutely at tension with the things that are our core mission. We want to put up another research facility. Well, we got a hard time finding land for that. But we commit a lot of land to our intercollegiate athletics. So the rub of what I'm saying is, as we go forward, I want to just congratulate the department on making great strides in many areas. I would support us continuing to make improvements in the areas that are the highest profile and the most likely to generate revenue. But I do want to make sure that the public understands that we as a board are very focused on striking the balance between the assets and resources we put into intercollegiate athletics with our obligation to meet our other core mission requirements as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Regent Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple of years ago, we had the opportunity to meet over in Minneapolis, and that meeting was between Mr. Coyle and myself prior to you being hired as athletic director. That meeting was memorable for an hour and a half, and I walked away and I said, this is someone special. And I mean again today, Mr. Coyle, you and your team have done absolutely stellar work on behalf of the University of Minnesota. And I congratulate you, Ms. McFarland, Mr. Burnett, and Ms. Tonneson on all the work you have done to improve the University of Minnesota Department of Athletics. The accountability, the transparency, the audits, all that you have done. Other than the person to my right, which is the president of the university, you as the athletic director have some of the highest profile around the state. Some of the coaches certainly, but in a collective way. And you have a difficult job. You have an impossible job. And I recognize that, and I hope my fellow board members recognize that. But having said that, all of the statistics, all of the information, all of the trend lines are moving in an extremely positive position. And it's to be recognized, and we do so today. If I may be so bold, as the most senior, second most senior member on this board, I would caution my fellow board members in this way. We cannot, whether it be the Department of Athletics, Department of Engineering, School of Veterinary Medicine, get too engaged in the daily operations. We have hired these people, called the president and his senior staff, and for us to get engaged in the minutia and the daily operations is extremely dangerous. I experienced it when I was the board chair. I continue to hear about it now. And to my fellow board members, these are the professionals that we have asked, in this case, the Department of Athletics, to hire the coaches, manage the budget, work hard on every aspect of it, and yes, ultimately that we have, winning teams. But it's more than that. All of the benchmarks of our student athletes are doing very well academically. They're proud to be here as athletes. But a frustration I had then, and I continue to have now, and I suppose one could say this is in-house family business. We shouldn't talk about it. But I feel compelled to say it publicly. We as Regents cannot interfere with the working of the Department of Athletics on a day-to-day basis. It has to be left to Mr. Coyle and his entire team and Mr. Burnett. If I had my wish today, Mr. Chair, I'd love to pass a resolution in support of Department of Athletics and Mr. Coyle and the work he has done and the improvements that we have seen. And I know we're not going to do that. But if you can tell by my comments, I feel extremely, extremely strongly about this department and the improvements. And we have had some blimps, I know that. We've had some difficult times. But the direction we're going in the win-loss, academics, the coaches that have been hired, the work that you folks have done is absolutely stellar. And from one region to the department, thank you for your work. Thank you for moving us forward. And we look forward to working with you through the President's office and how we might be supportive of this great university and its athletic program. Thank you for listening.
All right, I've got 3 regents remaining, Regent Hsu, Anderson, and Powell. We are 15 minutes from our scheduled closing, and we have perhaps the most important topic facing us of all, the long-range financial plan. Did I miss someone over there? Okay, Regents, so I've got 4 regents left, and we got to be concise here on both the question and the answer end. I'll turn to Regent Hsu first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, presenters. I want to focus my few minutes on something that I think is very important, and that is player safety. Specifically, there have been a lot of reports we've received mail about, specifically about things like CTE, which involves primarily football players, possibly hockey players, possibly soccer players, not sure exactly, maybe even wrestling. But I just want to make sure that we're doing everything we possibly can to guarantee the safety, or maybe not even guarantee, but provide the best environments for player safety in all of our sports. And so the question maybe you could answer quickly is there anything we're not doing that you think we can be doing or should be doing in the area of player safety?
Director Coyle.
Chair McMillan and Regent Hsu, thank you for the question. I can tell you about 12 months ago, we restructured our athletic performance area, and we looked at best practices across the country and what our peers were doing, and our number one priority is the safety of our student athletes. Winning is fun, I get that. Standing up in front of you and telling you what we're doing academically is fun, but our number one priority is to make sure we provide the best possible care for all 700 student athletes. So we have gone through a restructure. We brought in Joy Thomas, who came to us from the University of Wyoming, highly respected and regarded, and we continue daily to make sure we provide that ultimate care to our student athletes.
Regent Hsu, a follow-up?
Yeah, follow-up. So thank you for answering that question. That was the most important one. I also have a litany of other questions related to the report, but I'll focus on one other area that I think we should be talking about, and that is strategic planning for athletics. It was mentioned in passing in this report. We're going to have the long-term financial strategic planning report next, but I think athletics does fit into the whole thing. I do have some concerns about how the finances have been characterized in the presentation. For example, you are writing a check for scholarships or for students and their tuition, but keep in mind, if we didn't have 700 student athletes, we'd have 700 students taking that spot, and they would be paying tuition. So I don't see how those numbers should net out with any of the other numbers. So that's just one issue. I have others. And I do want to request copies of the budget for the past 3 years. I recall that when I first joined this board, the budget was barely over 100 million. Maybe it was just 100 million, and now it's 121 million. And, I know we've increased our expenses in terms of funding or financing costs for things like the Athletes Village, et cetera. So I just want to make sure that we're doing what we can do to make sure we don't have to raise tuition on other students. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Hsu. Regent Anderson.
Thank you, and I'll try to be brief too, Chair McMillan.
Thank you.
First of all, and I want to thank you people too for the fabulous work you do. I was going to say when I came it was 105 million, and my take on it is that we've been able to raise revenues, whether it's through TV or something like that, so that's a good job. But I'm a fan. I've been a fan since my dad brought me to my first game at Williams Arena. But when I sit in this chair, I am a business person, and most people probably don't know this, but I know Athletic Director Coyle does, that I have a history of sports administration with a professional sports franchise, so that's kind of the dark side of my life I don't like to talk about, but I know what that's like. But I was sitting with another Big Ten university president one day, And he's not as smart as President Kaler, but he's a pretty smart guy. And he said, you know, with athletics, we're never going to put more people in the chairs than we are today. It's going to decline. It's going to decline. And that's the cutting of the cord and everything. And I was with my sports administration hat on last night, sitting watching to the Twins game with my iPad here, and I looked and I saw, wow, the Twins have a lot of empty seats. And they've underperformed this year. They're down about 2,000 people a game. One of the things I want to tell people here is how the University of Minnesota has a unique perspective in who we are in the Big Ten. And it dates way back to having a territorial college prior to the land-grant mission. If you go back, part of the land-grant mission in 1860 was agriculture. Our competitors, for instance, Wisconsin is in Madison, not Milwaukee. Indiana's in Bloomington, not Indianapolis. Nebraska is in Lincoln, not Omaha. Michigan's in Ann Arbor, not Detroit. That was part of the land-grant mission to give them agriculture. Where it relates today, without telling you the whole story, is the competition we face for the entertainment dollar, because our college was already in the metro area. We have the Twins, we have the Vikings, we have the Wild, we have soon to come new PGA golf. So I thought of the business part and the competitiveness, and I looked at NCAA basketball statistics. 2017, Minnesota ranked, there's 347 teams. We ranked 37th in attendance, 10,308. Top 10%. Michigan was 33rd with 11,121, and they went to the national championship. They weren't that much better than us. But the other schools that have all of those competitors, TCU in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, 6,000 people. Southern Cal in LA, 4,000 people. Stanford in San Francisco, 3,800 people. So my point is, we face unique challenges with attendance and getting people to attend games with our competition, and we're meeting it. And we are meeting it. And it's going to be tough going forward. But I just think that is something that people, they don't know. But when I look at my sports administration hat and marketing, we are doing something to get those people to the games. And so kudos to you guys. Best of luck going forward. It's too much time already. I'm sorry.
It's all right. We've always liked to learn about your dark side, Regent Anderson.
Well, and AD Coyle better watch out. We got a sports administrator over here.
Regent Powell and then Regent Swigum.
Thanks, Chair McMillan. I'll also be as brief as I can. And Director Coyle, you know how supportive I am of the program and of your leadership and the tone that you're setting. Really grateful. It's been said better than I can say it over the course of the presentation. I'm going to just kind of continue on sort of, if you will, the risks that Regent Anderson were, and you articulated those very well, particularly the ticket revenue thing. And you see the same thing in a number of not only collegiate sports, but professional sports now. And I don't know what it is. My worry is how long before the media revenue, starts to follow as well. And my guess is maybe not too long. And since that's just ballooned over the last 10 years to a number that you're very. So I would urge the team, your team, to really focus in on revenue risk, both ticket and media. What happens if it goes south? What do we do? How do we manage that? I can anticipate a day where we have to have that conversation. How do we manage it? Who knows? May rain tomorrow. I mean, hate to focus on risk, but the media contribution has become so outsized and really so, in a way, unbelievable compared to what any of us would have thought 10 years ago. I really think that your team should be thinking hard about what we do in the event that it doesn't always work out that way. Thanks a lot.
Vice President Burnett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regent Powell, if you remember our 21 key risks, athletics was in two parts. One was reputational risk and the other was business risk. We absolutely agree with you and had it in our top 21 risks for the university on the risk profile.
You have a way better memory than I do.
All right, Regent Swigum, bring us home here, and then we'll.
Mr. Chairman, Director Coyle, let me enhance what some other regents have said. You do things the right way, and you've been here for a year and a half, maybe 2 years, and thank you for doing it the right way for our intercollegiate program. two questions, and I'm trying not to delve into your job. It's your job, it's not mine. Two questions with this wonderful athletes village we have that is just opened up here a couple months ago, a few months ago. Do you have any concern that we are going to be separating our athletes from the rest of the student body? And we talked here about the front porch, about inspiring connections, a common bond, forging friendships, sparking school spirit, and loyalty. Is that going to be a challenge now with the Athletes Village and if athletes somewhat more separated from the rest of the student population?
Chair McMillan, Regents Switzer, thank you for the question. When I got into athletic administration 25 years ago, we all have our core values that we focus on, right? And one of my core values, being a former athlete myself at the Division III level at Drake University, was to make sure that I do everything I can as an athletic administrator to make sure that our student athletes are integrated with the student population as much as possible. And I can tell you, Athletes Village, the Nutrition Center, lunch and breakfast is open to anybody. So any student, any of you could come and pay for your meal and eat there. Dinner time is our training table just for our student athletes, but I think the more interaction we have with our student athletes, with the general student population, the better. So just know that that's one of our core values that we focus on.
But Mr. Chairman, Mr. Director Quell, I'm sure you're aware of it. I just wanted to make sure you're aware of it publicly. That I'm concerned about that as we go forward in the future. Yep. And second of all, and this kind of delves into your job, not my job, and I almost apologize for stating this, but on the heels of what Regent Powell said, and the importance of ticket sales and the three major revenue sports, financing our entire program for 25 sports, on the horizon, as we look at the Marquettes and the UNIs, the North Dakotas and the Iowa States, whenever we can schedule or try to schedule those programs, and I'm sure there's some reasons why we don't, and I don't need to go into. I can just see the cars come up 35W and 94 like they do from Iowa and Madison, and I'm sure you're aware of it, but for the life of me, I don't know why we don't play UNI in basketball in Iowa State. I don't know, and it would help our ticket sales. We'd fill the stadium.
Director Coyle.
Chair McMillan and Regent Swigum, the scheduling is a complex process, and if you look, there's no doubt playing regional teams is critical, but when you look at postseason, like if you look, for example, with football, we have obviously nine conference games, which gives us room for 3 non-conference opponents. And then men's basketball, we're going to 20 conference games this year, so it limits your non-conference games and who you can play. And I can get really confusing about which quadrant the team falls into when they do the NCAA tournament selection. But there's no doubt playing regional teams would help attendance, and that's something that we need to be mindful of.
Mr. Chairman, I realize we got to get 20 wins to get to the NCAA. I realize that, but
quality
you
wins.
And I both know that if you schedule Iowa State, we'll fill the stadium over here, where if we schedule Southwest Louisiana Knitting College or whatever it is, probably not going to fill that.
St. Olaf.
Yeah. Ticket sales are important.
St. Olaf.
All right.
St. Olaf.
All right, considering we've still got a big item ahead of us, we'll ask Senior Vice President Burnett to stay put, and the rest of the team to depart with our thanks for a great report. And as Senior Vice President Burnett's getting set up, I think President Kaler will kick us off, and we probably want to look at a bit of a 45-minute time frame here, probably something that approaches closer to 20 to 30 minutes. It's an important topic. We can't do a drive-by, but we need to keep moving. So, President Kaler.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Message received. Since March of this year, you've heard from senior leaders who are directing the work on our system-wide strategic plans. 5 focus areas: outreach and public engagement, research and discovery, medicine and health, and finally teaching and learning. Vice Presidents Kramer, Levine, Tolar, and Hansen have presented to you, and so now I introduce Senior Vice President Brian Burnett to discuss the 5th and final component in the system-wide strategic plan, supporting the mission. His presentation will outline the hard work we've taken to determine how to best leverage our financial and human resources, and we will illustrate some hard questions that we have asked. It should go without saying, but I will say it, none of the elements of our system-wide strategic plan can be effectively implemented if we can't find the resources to do that. So I thank the Regents for your attentiveness, and with that, Mr. Chair, I'll turn to Senior Vice President Burnett for presentation and discussion on supporting the mission.
Very good. Please proceed.
Thank you, President Kaler and Chair McMillan and members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you about the work we take great pride in to support the mission of this university. Today we're going to talk about the purpose, setting some context with regard to the other 4 system-wide strategic plan objectives, the activities underway to support these mission objectives, and how we see financial sustainability in today's world, and obviously work to leave time for questions and thoughts from the board. Before we get started, I'd just like to call out Associate Vice President Tonneson and Vice President Gulacek and Chief of Staff Liz Jewell, who helped me pull all this together from across the entire university. Thank you for the work, and we're going to have some help here because our technology. First, I want to just talk about a little bit about the purpose we serve, and I'm going to channel Joe Constant from his presentation to you in June, and I really appreciated his analogy about, and I asked him if I could borrow it. He said, with pleasure. So he talked about the university, and I might enhance it a little bit about it being a quality car and our role in driving or steering that car. I think we don't want to oversteer. I think we need to be ever watchful of what's ahead on the road. I think we need to keep it well fueled and well maintained. And I think we need to avoid sudden stops and starts, just as you would with any quality car you're driving. And I think as we looked at the road ahead, we know that on any given day, we need to make decisions about what path to follow. And at times, we may choose to contract or stop doing things. At times, you may seek to status quo. And at other times, maybe we want to aspire as a university and as a system to take a different path. I would submit to you the budget that you just adopted in June. I would put in the status quo category. There weren't a number of huge investments in there. There weren't a big contraction piece, other than there were reallocations to make that budget work. But I would submit to you the budget that we just approved was more down that center path you see in front of you. And candidly, we need to be looking for fuel efficiencies. We need our car to be more fuel efficient no matter which of these 3 roads we take. We get that. We get it clearly. But we need to continue to ask the board to help us choose the correct path at the correct time. I do think that is a critical role for a governing board. When you think about university operations and the mission and a continued focus on long-term sustainability, you really have to think about optimizing your human, your facility, your technology, your financial resources, because together that's how we deliver what we deliver for the state of Minnesota. In the view of many college presidents and scholarly research, quite frankly, higher education exists in what many call an iron triangle, meaning you can have 2 of these, but having all 3 is quite frankly very challenging, if not impossible. You can have high quality and you can have high access, but it's going to come at a price. It's going to come at a price. You can have high cost and you can have low access and maintain high quality. But it's almost impossible to have all 3 at the same time. So I think as we talk through the pieces and the unique role that the University of Minnesota serves in this state, thinking about these challenges and these push points between quality, cost, and access is something that we need to discuss as we put together the statewide strategic plan. And I would submit to you, conversely, continuing to cut costs in higher education must eventually lead to some other piece of this triangle. If you're going to continue to reduce costs, at some point it's going to affect quality and access. Now, this whole piece of the strategic plan is really supporting those 4 system objectives you've heard from already. The 4 senior leaders came to you over the last several meetings, and the 5th objective, to support the mission, we must be responsive to the plans and initiatives outlined in those 4 objectives. Essentially, it's about their goals and how do we help them meet those goals. And our goal is to ensure that the resources are in place to achieve these objectives on a human side, capital side, infrastructure, in addition to financial resources. We will make it a continued priority to develop realistic financial forecasts and plans. That has to be paramount. We have to continually create and implement efficiencies in our operations. We know that. And we have to ensure that investments incorporated into our budgets are aligned closely with the strategies approved in this planning process. We've heard Board clearly on that. And I think we also, another piece of this is creating expectations of our units across this institution living within their financial means so that problems are not passed on to future leaders or future boards to resolve. So as we think about just a quick recap of the 4 pillars of this strategic plan, in brief review, Vice President Kramer discussed the outreach and public service objective priorities with you back in February. And those priorities could really be summarized by extend and apply and exchange our knowledge between the university and society, optimize our communications and marketing system-wide, and deliver useful and actionable information to stakeholders. That's how I kind of boil down Matt's entire presentation. On research and discovery, Vice President Levine discussed this with you in March. And the big, boiling that one down is about enhancing and activating our research and core and emerging issues that are important to Minnesota. Leveraging our outstanding areas of expertise, national and local funding, and having transparency, accountability, and optimizing our institutional research funding and infrastructure. I think that's absolutely critical for success. Dean Toller and the medicine and health objective priorities were shared with you in May. Obviously, enhancing the clinical partnerships has been a big focus of this administration over the last year plus. You can maybe argue 5 to 7 years plus, but has reached a fever pitch with the work we've done with Fairview and mHealth. We also, that in line will also serve to enhance the prestige of the medical school. And the priorities of the state include helping serve the healthcare workforce needs of the state, which the medical school is intimately involved with. But at the end of the day, I think when you think about why we're supporting this unique mission of the university, it's about the health and lives of all Minnesotans that we serve through the healthcare and the clinical enterprise that we work through. And the fourth pillar was the teaching and learning priority that Executive Vice President Provost Hanson discussed with you in June. And across, boiling down a very challenging list of ideas was delivering education across our distinct campuses for a changing Minnesota and thinking about enhanced system mindfulness. Enhancing our student experience on all the campuses to ensure their success, and articulating an investment strategy on the academic side to leverage distinct campus strengths and advance our collective excellence. That's what we heard. And while we develop priorities under each of these objectives, we think it's important to note that we have been and will continue to meet the expectations outlined in the progress card previously adopted by this board. The plans you have heard about relate to the system-wide strategic plans I've just outlined, as well as our efforts under supporting the mission are directly linked to a number of gold and maroon measures on the Regents progress card. To highlight a couple of these, institutional gift aid. You heard discussion today from the Alumni Association about the unique role that our alums play in helping us bring gifts to this university. And those goals are important to maintain the excellence of this institution. R&D expenditures, if you think about the University of Minnesota as Minnesota's land-grant research university, this is core to our mission. And having those goals in the goal of hitting those numbers has obviously been a priority of this board. The medical school ranking has also been a gold measure for the Board of Regents, and also a piece of what we were talking about with the clinical enterprise. percentage of participation in employee engagement survey may not seem as important, but when you have an engaged workforce, and I would suggest to you that our latest numbers of getting close to 72%, we were close to 70% in the employee engagement survey, would be numbers that corporations in the Twin Cities and beyond would really be proud of, to have that level of engagement from employees. So having a motivated workforce, what I would submit to you is our most valuable resource going forward, is something we need to continue to pay attention to. And then on your maroon measures, a number of system ones tied to operational excellence, being mindful of spending on leadership and oversight as a percentage of the budget. We understand this is a priority not just here, but down the street in St. Paul, and proving that we are administratively efficient to the legislature and the governor are critically important to our future. We also need to pay attention to the gross square footage we have in poor or critical condition. We are not going to provide the great educational and research experiences we are with buildings that are not up to par and are not safe to be in. Sustainability, we've made great progress there with some of the investments that prior boards and you have made. And then also just protecting our credit rating, having that liquidity on our balance sheet so that we can service comfortably the debt that we've issued is a key to our success. And then the land grant mission, if you think about public service expenditures, a piece of why the land grants, the whole Land Grant Act, the Moral Act during the Civil War was put forth, was to take and translate the latest research into benefiting the lives of the citizens we serve. That's as true today, many centuries since, as it was back then. Then on our research, obviously paying attention to our national public research ranking and maintaining a top 10 ranking doesn't come without investments being made and continuing to be made. So we think about your gold and maroon measures that you have. We understand that you're going to relook at these and make sure that these are the ones this board wants to focus on, but it obviously has to inform how we put together a financial sustainability, because the way I see this is what you've said is important to you as a board at the governance level. So supporting the mission and the activities. In human resources, we're going to talk about efforts to reduce transaction activities and increase recruitment to enhance talent acquisition. We need to optimize our HR. Employee engagement we've talked about, but leadership and management and supervisory training, we've talked about that within one of our risk profiles. And being an employer of choice within the Twin Cities will be a key to our success. In information technology and an increasingly digital environment, we need to have analytics, and high performance research, network, and computing will keep us competitive with our peers and aspirational peers. And quite frankly, as we look to the future, we need to support remote healthcare enabling solutions so that we can bring the best healthcare to rural parts, to the parts of greater Minnesota that don't have access to some of the state-of-the-art facilities and doctors that are here in the Twin Cities. On real estate and space management, we need to get to full implementation of enterprise asset management, and we really need to address our maroon metric on gross square footage in poor condition, along with making sure our campus master plans are reasonable. In response to and talking with board leadership and those working with us on the strategic plan, the financial planning horizon we have targeted involves the next 3 biennia. A 6-year planning horizon, which matches up nicely with our 6-year capital plan. I will share with you over the next several slides the factors we are working with as modeling what the next 6 years could look like. First, within the processes and practices we engage in currently, we have an opportunity to focus our efforts in support of the actions that have been described throughout the strategic plan process. We need to create options for financing the work of this university in ways that are sustainable and realistic and grounded in political realities, workforce realities, economic or inflationary realities, and so forth. So, example, as we build the biennial budget request for the state, we will shape our proposals to address the needs of the state and the needs of the university as they exist geographically across our state. And as we develop our annual operating and capital budgets, we need to ensure that our investments are aligned with these specific priorities developed through this strategic plan and with the base infrastructure needs that all of our activities depend on. And we will continually work on make this engine of this vehicle we've talked about more fuel efficient. We need to be planful about restructuring, reprioritizing, and reallocating resources to higher priority needs. And as we build relationships with people and places outside of the university, we will target our efforts specifically to generate respect and enthusiasm for our work and additional resources to allow for that aspirational growth I talked about earlier. So what are those key drivers of financial sustainability? One tool to ensure we're on the right track or discover where is a long-range financial planning model. Now, as this committee has come together as the Finance and Operations Committee, and previous finance committees had seen a long-range financial plan. Those that had not had the opportunity on this board to serve on the Finance Committee had not seen the long-range financial plan. But recognizing the value of that exercise, it has served the Finance Committee, or the prior Committee of Finance, well, and understanding potential gaps in revenues and expenditures under different assumptions, and it will continue to help us as we move forward with this plan. We see the primary drivers for the university's financial modeling to include tuition rates and enrollment plans for each student level and for each campus. Candidly, we're more tuition dependent than we've ever been in the history of the school, all 5 campuses, and it's not going to likely change in the future. Projected changes in state appropriations obviously is a key. Those 2 pieces represent the two largest pieces of your unrestricted revenue for the entire institution. Projected changes in federal grants and contracts, changes in other miscellaneous revenues that we can generate through sales, fees, and gift revenue, and level of desire to required internal reallocation of existing resources, also known as budget cuts. Those are all resources we can use, and we did use, as putting the FY19 budget together. On the spending side, obviously, planned salary increases are an important piece of maintaining a workforce that's competent, that is compensated competitively. Projected changes in fringe benefit costs we have to pay attention to, and obviously we have to pay attention to the number of employees. The headcount we have drives those costs. And we have to think about inflationary expectations for general operating costs of running this institution, along with facility-related costs. Along all that, there's also a desired level of investment in academic or programmatic initiatives, such as things we might do in MnDrive, things that are emerging, that are problems for our state, like the opioid epidemic, that we are uniquely positioned to help this state deal with. So we've been discussing there are many actions that can impact these key drivers, and we would suggest to you that the road toward the university continually curves and shifts, and we hit bumps and decide to check out the roadside along the way. We look at different things along the way, but we must remain open to new ideas and strategies for financing this institution. And some of the ideas currently on the radar for exploration to include our public-private partnerships. We've made some use of P3s, or public-private partnerships, but we could partner more deeply with the private sector to achieve our goals at a lower cost, perhaps. And we can look at things like what Ohio State did with privatizing and selling off their power plants and parking. I think that there's challenges with those, but those are things we can absolutely open up and have a discussion about. I think we absolutely should do a strategic asset review. We have a huge and varied portfolio of assets, and there may be some opportunities to better utilize or monetize them. An example happening now with UMore. Right, with the approval you gave us last month on the sale of part of UMore. I believe bringing someone in with a deep knowledge of current best practices nationally would be of benefit to the university. Bring someone in with some outside thinking. To that end, I intend to seek proposals, if the board is supportive of this effort, from external firms to advise us on opportunities that maybe we don't see ourselves. A quick and recent example of our work has been our recent work with the state in competing for the Army Futures Command. That was a very quick, nimble, strategic asset review as the university put its unique footprint, its research enterprise, our capital assets together to create, I think, a very viable option for the Defense Department to consider Minneapolis for this command. And we should hear something hopefully later this month, and hopefully it's good news for the state of Minnesota. And we really appreciate Regents Rocha and Regent Johnson coming and helping support that effort. But if you think about, we did a strategic asset review over the course of about 2 weeks of how could we meet the Army's needs with very little details to go on. Those are things that we need to be not just thinking long-term about, but being nimble, as in this recent case. On space utilization, the university has over 28 million square feet of space across the system. To keep facility costs low as possible, we need to more effectively utilize our space and minimize the addition of new space wherever possible. It's just a huge cost. Funding for facility repair and renovation. While we are grateful for the capital investment support we receive from the state, it is clear that maintaining, preserving, and renewing our capital investments will require new strategies and tools that we're going to have to consider. Our recent addition of commercial paper brings down our costs of borrowing. The commercial paper facility that the board approved, that has now been executed, brings down our cost of borrowing in the short run. And those are things that we need to look at those tools to how do we get to best practices there. As was noted in the pillar on teaching and learning, but a system-wide enrollment management plan, the university moves forward to accommodating perhaps 3,000 more students over the next 6 years. It will be necessary for us to make sure we have the resources necessary, the physical assets necessary to take in 3,000 more students, and think about how those revenue gains are applied strategically for those campuses. And then I think we have to think about central service centers or clusters even more than we've done. We've done some consolidation and human resource work into clusters, but there are likely other opportunities to consolidate and reduce costs without reducing quality or service to the units. And finally, I think we have to talk about what do we stop doing? What do we think about stop doing so we can invest in higher priorities? There are opportunities to right-size the organization structure to better match our strategic plan while reducing duplication and costs. And recent plans related to the organizational change in the Academic Health Center serve as an example of this, as President Kaler noted earlier in the appointment of Vice President of Clinical Affairs, Jacob Toller. In other instances, we could look at de-emphasizing or perhaps eliminating activities that are no longer a priority and redeploying those staff and resources to higher priority activities. There may be other potential opportunities as well to contribute to this overall financial sustainability. But I think what I'm trying to say is I think we have to be bold and think about challenging long-held assumptions about what we own, about what we do, and about how we approach our business. So, as we turn back to the road before us and the choices we have for which road to follow and the status of our quality car, I think we have to think about all the constituents we serve. We heard earlier today about the alumni care about the value of their degree and the stature of this institution and how that matters to them. My guess is the alumni would push for the Aspire piece to be something even better than what it was when they were here. Obviously, some folks would like us to continue the status quo, and some folks would like us to potentially be smaller or do less than what we're doing today. I think what I would share with you as we turn into the discussion piece is I think it's be very important for the board to help the administration with what road do you want to take with this strategic plan, because we can do any number of models, scenarios, much like we did on the FY19 budget. But having a coherent and a collaborative discussion with the board about where you see this university going helps us put those things together to support the mission. So as we put to this strategic direction, I think we welcome your discussion on these concepts and ideas. The idea that combining cost reductions with access and quality improvements at the institutional level it can't be the only recipe for success. It is challenging, if not an unbreakable relationship between access, quality, and cost. We just have to understand that. Nothing in these concepts means that a business line or program level that we must abandon efforts to, we have to continue to reassess our priorities. We will continue to pursue ideas and priorities you've heard about for each of the objectives in the plan, and others as arise as a normal part of striving to be the best we can be. We would benefit from a discussion of the board's priorities related to this information I've outlined. Are there ideas that have grabbed your attention and when you encourage us to pursue other options? Are there other items you say that are ripe for investment? These are the very questions that the administration would like to work with you as we bring you a solid plan at the September meeting around supporting the mission of the strategic plan. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to take questions and comments.
All right, thank you, Senior Vice President Burnett. Knowing that the car has been on the road for approaching 3.5 hours and probably needs an exit ramp, I'm going to exercise some prerogative here, and we are going to pass on questions and discussion at this point, knowing full well that we have an opportunity and a priority item on our retreat agenda to dig into the strategic plan and to dig into 2018-19 priorities. But before I close this piece of the agenda and go to the report of committees, I'd like President Kaler to bring it in for kind of a closing here.
Thank you, Chair McMillan. This is a very timely tee-up. We have for you paper copies of our draft strategic plan that I will discuss with you tomorrow. Chief of Staff Stedlin has those for you. I apologize for not getting them earlier, but it is literally hot off the press. And we can have a robust discussion tomorrow around the strategic directions and priorities. So I think we're fine not doing that now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, President Kaler, and thank you.
Thank you, sir.
I reported earlier on the work of the Presidential Review Committee during my remarks. One committee met earlier today. Regent Beeson, do you have a report of the Litigation Review Committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Litigation Review Committee met today. At this meeting, we adopted a resolution that authorized the closing of the meeting to discuss matters subject to attorney-client privilege.
Thank you. Is there any old business to come before the board? New business? No new business. I would entertain a motion to adjourn today's meeting.
So moved.
Second. Very good. All in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.
I read the original contract.